for the House Health and Government Operations Committee. I'm your chairman, Jocelyn Pena-Milnick, joined by my vice chair, Bonnie Collison. Today we have 11 hearings. I kindly ask for your patience if we encounter any technical or streaming issues. I'm going to go through some of the rules in the committee, and one of them is this one. Make sure that you turn off your phone, put it onto vibrate, please. As a reminder, there's no food or drink allowed in the gallery. Our staff does not have the time to clean it. You'll see us drink, but we're here for hours, so we have to drink. For each bill, we're going to hear from the bill sponsor and the sponsor panel, followed by an all in-person witnesses. If there are a large number of witnesses, I will alternate between favorable and unfavorable, just to give everyone a fair chance of being heard. Also, I have decided not to time the bill sponsor in this committee. Other committees do, but please, be mindful and do not abuse that, okay? While all the other witnesses have 2 minutes to provide testimony. A timer is displayed on the screen, and all the witnesses panel will see that and hear it. If it goes off and your time has expired, what I do ask is that you wrap it up. Don't make me do that for you. For the committee, please, I just want to say thank you for all the work you're doing. As you know, we have 11 hearings today. We're going to have more than that as we get closer to sine die. You being here makes a difference because we can do the work, and I really appreciate your time and you being on time. Please adhere to our usual committee rules of 1 question and 1 answer, and please keep your questions brief. Remember that you will have an opportunity to ask those questions offline, and that we do a lot of the work actually here, most of it in subcommittee. Members of the public will be able to view the live stream of this hearing on the Maryland General Assembly website and the YouTube channel. Today, we'll hear the bills in the following order. Now, remember that I can change it based on the fact that if you don't see a member here, for example, Delegate Kaiser has another bill hearing, but she'll be back, and we always listen to the recordings as well. And you'll see that our members will get up. It's not meant in a disrespectful way, is that they have hearings in other committees as well, but they'll be back, okay? We're going to start with House Bill 466, and he is ready. Delegate Kipke, Health Equity for Service Members Act. If you could bring your panel. Then we're going to go on to Delegate Kipke again, House Bill 448. Then we have House Bill 376, 340, 606, 340, 806, 821, 455, 331, 423, 421, and we are going to end with House Bill 367. But please keep in mind that I reserve the right to change it depending on the availability of the witnesses and the sponsors. Delegate Kipke, will you please get started? And thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Delegate Nick Kipke presenting House Bill 466, Health Equality for Service Members Act. Some of you may have noticed that my senator is scooting around on a scooter
Yes.
because of a foot injury. And because he's not very mobile, over the last year, he put a lot of work into updating with a series of bills Maryland's code as it relates to the uniformed services. This bill in particular updates current benefits to all service members, including no fee collected for birth certificates. These are all existing policies, recording all veterans admitted to hospitals, consideration for relocation to our state or temporary deployment out of state, making behavioral health services available, and providing access to PTSD treatments to all uniformed services. A recent study showed how commissioned corps officers and public health service officers are dealing with PTSD in their stressful line of work across the world. And so those are the 2 branches of uniformed services that will be included in what we already do for our armed services. One thing I didn't know when he brought this to me, and this is in your packet, there's a PowerPoint that you can open up and look through, and one of the pages has some photographs of it and some examples. NOAA supported mine sweeping of explosives in the Gulf. The Public Health Service deployed 100 uniformed service members to Iraq and Afghanistan when there was the conflicts going on there. NOAA coordinates weather satellites all around the world to support military operations, and the Public Health Service deployed uniformed individuals to Africa to fight Ebola. So it's an area of, those are organizations I didn't know a whole lot about, but they certainly are at the service of the United States government, and they live, many live here in Maryland. The health occupations article provisions updated in this article all apply to 6 of the 8 uniformed service branches. This bill updates these current provisions to all 8 of our service member branches. And lastly, what it does to the health occupation boards are the following. It revises terminology to the modern terminology that we use for all of the branches of uniformed service. Health occupation boards have to consider giving credits for training and education received in the uniformed services. The boards have to consider licensing renewal when someone deploys overseas in service of the United States, provides the health occupation boards with information on culture in the uniformed services, and waive the optometry examination if certain standards are met for all branches of uniformed service. Lastly, I would note, in general, these bills are not changing any underlying policy. It just simply expands it to all the uniformed services. There's zero fiscal impact to the state. It can all be done within the current budget. It's supported by everyone who's looked at it. There are some minor amendments. I'll mention for council, the senator is working very hard over in the Senate so that we don't have to. And there are some amendments coming together that we should take our time before we look at it. But when I met with him this morning, and he's met with the governor's office, and there's some minor tweaks that will need to take place that we support. We just want to make sure that we get the wording right. We'll have that soon. With that, I conclude my testimony. Thank you.
Afternoon, sir.
Thank you, Chair Peña-Melnick and members of this committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in favor with amendment of Delegate Kipke's bill. I'm Dave Dragic, a retired Army Colonel and Legislative Director for the Maryland Military Coalition. We strongly support this bill's modernization of the Maryland Code, making it consistent with the U.S. Code in using key terms related to the uniformed services and making the use of those terms consistent throughout the Maryland Code without changing any policy. This is critical as a lower percentage of our population serves or has served in the uniformed services. 88% of the current 185 members of the Maryland General Assembly have never served in uniform. That's all the more reason to ensure that the usage of these terms in Maryland Code is clear and correct, leaving no opportunity for misinterpretation and for our position on the term veteran in HB 466. Our position is to make certain that those who have served in the Public Health Service and NOAA continue to have the same rights and benefits as those veterans who have served in the armed forces and received a DD Form 214 that is other than dishonorable. Our position is to make certain that all federal and state legal references supporting that clearly indicate the same thing to all who will use these references in the future. That is why we've worked with Senator Simoner in the Senate and Delegate Kipke in requesting this amendment to avoid any misuse of the term or misinterpretation of who is a veteran in any future legislation or policy making. So the Maryland Military Coalition strongly supports HB 466 and asks for a favorable with amendment report from this committee. And we would like to thank Delegate Kipke for sponsoring this legislation and appreciate his leadership on this issue.
Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it for your service. Delegate Kipke, did you see the amendments submitted by the Maryland Board of Nursing?
Yes.
Okay, and you're okay with those?
Yeah, that's what I was referencing earlier. There are several, some that are in your packet and some that are not in your packet yet, that he's working through. He's taking that work on, and we should have that with his counsel from the Senate soon.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Delegate Kipke and his panel? Seeing none, Delegate Kipke, thank you. And actually, this will conclude the bill hearing on House Bill 466. Let's move on to House Bill 448, Delegate Kipke, and it's actually titled Modernization of Military Laws Act.
Thank
I believe
you.
you have the same panelist.
Yes.
All right.
When Senator Simonaire asked me to cross-file these two bills, I knew he did because they would come to the HGO Committee. But he sold it to me as the fact that my father-in-law is a veteran, someone that we're very proud of. He's an American hero. He has the Silver Star, served 5.5 years as a prisoner of war, and has some incredible stories. And so it gives me great honor to work with the community, military and veteran community, to offer this legislation. Again, I mentioned my senator's had a lot of time off of his feet, and he noticed that throughout, when we do things with the military and the code, for instance, we added the Space Force. Well, some smart attorney had to go through the entire code looking for every instance where Space Force would need to be added. What this bill does is, one, it creates a base definition of all the different uniformed services using the federal definition. In our code, we spell it out differently. We use different terminology and all over the place. So it'll have one official modern terminology, and it will centralize it in one place in the code, in the state government article. So now, whenever the legislature does something, with the passage of this bill, whenever the legislature does something that impacts this, it can reference one spot in the code, and it will be uniform and consistent. It also updates the military terminology all throughout the code. For example, the bill will update the language as it relates to the reserve component, which includes all of the uniformed service reserve units. In spring of 2021, the first officers were commissioned in the Public Health Service Ready Reserve Corps. Veteran, it changes the definition of veteran to align with the federal definition. Service member expands that to all of the uniformed service members, and uniformed services ID card is updated because that's what the federal government calls it now, instead of a military ID, which is no longer used. It provides rules of interpretation for military terminology. The bill updates the general provision articles rules of interpretation, so if there's an absence of a definition, these terms will apply. It's basically a catch-all for the undefined terms. You'll remember last year we added military family as an emphasis in the military department of the state. So this bill adds a definition of military families. One doesn't currently exist. And the new department title is not inclusive of non-military families. Therefore, the definition makes it inclusive. It codifies the authority and duty to support our service members in the department. Obviously, they have that now, and they do it for the military branches, but they do it for the uniformed, NOAA and PHS, but this codifies it. Lastly, I would note that in general, these bills are not changing any underlying policy, but providing equality among our service members. And my senator worked very hard to keep the fiscal note to zero. And again, the bill is supported by everyone who's looked at it. There will be amendments that are minor, that are important, but minor, that the senator is working on, and we will have them from his council soon. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you again, and for the opportunity to testify in favor with amendment of this bill from Delegate Kipke's. For the record, Dave Dragic, Legislative Director for the Maryland Military Coalition. Little repetitive from the last bill, but we strongly support the bill's modernization, making it consistent with the U.S. Code and using key terms. And we, again, want to ensure that the usage of these terms in Maryland Code is clear and correct, leaving no opportunity for misinterpretation for our position. And I want to enter into the record the legal definition of veteran as outlined in the Congressional Research Service report, Who is a Veteran? Quote, The statutory definition of veteran contains two key provisions that a service member must meet to be considered a veteran by law. First, the service member must have served and completed active military, naval, air, or space service. And the second provision is that a service member must be discharged from service under other than dishonorable conditions. So for these reasons, that's why we're submitting the request for favorable with amendments to make sure that Maryland Code is in line with the federal statute, 38 U.S. Code 101, and the relevant subparagraphs. And for these reasons, the Maryland Military Coalition strongly supports HB 448, and we'd like to ask for a favorable amendment report from the committee, and again, like to thank Delegate Kipke for sponsoring this legislation on this and appreciate his leadership on this issue.
And thank you again for your testimony. Are there any questions? Delegate Hill.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Madam Chair, and thank you, Delegate Kipke. Colonel, just a quick question. It's just general. We always put things in and we leave out the veterans who have been less than honorably discharged, many of whom have addiction problems, many of whom trained, and we always leave them out. I know we still have a homeless problem and other problems with our veterans. Can you just explain why we continually do not do for those people what we do for other folks who
I think that's changing. There is a bill that will come before, I know on the Senate side from Senator Guile, to change the definition to include those who might be treated for PTSD and those type of issues, because that's, you know, through no fault of their own. They sacrificed and incurred these injuries. So that's a changing. I'm not up on that at this point, but if you have any questions, you're certainly welcome to send it to the military coalitions, and we can look into it. But I believe that's changing.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we do have that bill here on the 25th. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much. And that was a good question, Delegate Hill. That is so important.
Thanks.
This actually concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 448. Next, we have House Bill 376, Maryland Cybersecurity Council membership alterations. I need Howard Barr and John Piastro. Thank you so much. Actually, why don't I do you want to do it together, or will you want rather him? Why don't let's have him give his testimony, and then I'll call you right afterwards, okay? Thank you. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm Howard Barr. I'm an Assistant Attorney General and Principal Counsel to the Department of Information Technology. The Office of the Attorney General respectfully urges this committee to report favorably on House Bill 376, which alters the selection process of the chair of the Maryland Cybersecurity Council, as well as selection for the membership of the council. Presently, the council is chaired by the Attorney General, and he is charged with appointing a number of the council's outside of government members. The council's membership is broadly representative of both government, including as members Secretary of Information Technology, Secretary of State Police, Secretary of Commerce, the Adjutant General, the State Administrator of Elections, and the Secretary of Emergency Management. On the civil society side, it includes individuals from the business, education, nonprofit, and consumer interest sectors. While the Attorney General will continue to be a council member, the bill proposes that the governor be responsible for appointing the members now appointed by the Attorney General, and that the chair be selected by the council membership. The Attorney General is, of course, the chief legal officer for the state, and together with the Assistant Attorneys General and professional staff comprising the Office of the Attorney General, works to advise and represent the state and its constituent units across a wide variety of programs and subject matter. The Attorney General, though, is not intimately involved in cybersecurity issues, and because of that, believes it is in the council's best interest that it be chaired by individuals more closely tied to that sector, and for a similar reason, believes that that he is not best positioned to appropriately appoint members to the council. Thank you for considering this testimony, and for the foregoing reasons, the Office of the Attorney General urges a favorable report on House Bill 376.
And thank you for your testimony today. I'm going to open it up for questions, okay? Any questions of this witness? Seeing none. Oh, yes, Delegate Hill.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick, Cybersecurity Association has requested an amendment. I don't know if you're aware of it, and I'd just like you to comment, request an amendment to include the Cybersecurity Association Incorporated as a member of the council in a manner similar to the Maryland Tech Council. I assume since you're trying to, this bill would shift appointing authority, that you would have no objection to that, but I wanted to ask.
I believe I saw a mention of that in the hearing agenda. I haven't spoken with the Attorney General about it, so I can't speak for him. Speaking personally, I don't see an issue with it.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. You stole my question. Go ahead. Actually, there are no other questions. Thank you for your testimony. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And this bill will be assigned to subcommittee, sir, so make sure that you're available for the subcommittee, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mr. John Fiastro from the Cybersecurity Association, and that is your amendment, what Delegate Hill just asked, correct?
Delegate Hill stole my thunder.
Well, just tell us why it's needed.
Madam Chair, for the record, my name is John Fiastro. I'm the lobbyist for the Cybersecurity Association. Some of you recognize the Cybersecurity Association, formerly known as CAMI, the Cybersecurity Association of Maryland. CAMI has taken more of a regional approach now and has changed its name to reflect that. The Cybersecurity Association has served on the council for as long as members can remember. The latest, the earliest recollection is a 2019 appointment. Currently, the association serves under one of 4 representatives from statewide or regional business associations. Given that the Cyber Association has a long-standing now position on the board, through that, it probably is appropriate to have a standalone mention of the association within the statute, much like Maryland Tech Council. The Cyber Association has over 600 members across the state and region, and is a fixture here in Annapolis to speak on these types of bills. We think it's appropriate, and we ask for the committee support of our amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Being here, are there any questions, Delegate Hill? Of course. I wish I knew. I had the lottery numbers, like I know you're going to ask a question.
So thank you. So as you said, already members of the Cybersecurity Association, through other affiliations, have 4 representatives there. If they're given a named seat, do you anticipate, or would you want those other positions to be rolled into this one? In other words, do they give up the other 4 and represent if they have a standalone seat, or they now have 5 seats?
Let me clarify what I meant then, Delegate. Right now, the statute, the membership says, the statute says regarding membership that there shall be 4 representatives chosen by the AG from statewide or regional business associations. Among those 4 is 1 member from the Cyber Association, our executive director that actually serves on the council. So what we're suggesting is breaking that out, not changing those current 4, but having an addition of 1, a net increase of 1, or to have a titularly named Cyber Association member.
And is there another group that's excluded, that if you're given that titularly named one, would then take the executive directors and the 4 that the AG had appointed? But is there some other group that has been not represented that should be represented?
Potentially, but that would be up to the governor's appointments office under the other changes in the bill to find. But they would go through the same appointment process that our executive director, well, they would be appointed as our executive director was appointed to be a member. But it would free up space conceivably, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Okay, I see no other questions. Thank you so much for
Thank you,
being with
Madam
us
Chair.
today.
Good afternoon.
You're welcome. This actually concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 376. Next, we have Delegate Ruth, Climate Change Attorney General Actions, Climate Change Restitution Fund, and Climate Change Restitution Fund Advisory Council, House Bill 340. Welcome, Delegate Ruth. Will you be so kind and bring your panel if you have one?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Health and Government Operations Committee, I'm pleased to be before you again. And this time, I'm presenting House Bill 340. For the record, my name is Delegate Sheila Ruth. I'd like to start by reading a quote for you from a report. Mathematical models of the Earth's climate indicate that if this warming occurs, then it could create significant changes in sea level, ocean currents, precipitation patterns, regional temperature, and weather. These changes could be larger than any that have occurred over the last 12,000 years. Such relatively fast and dynamic changes would impact on the human environment, future living standards, and food supplies, and could have major social, economic, and political consequences. There is reasonable scientific agreement that increased levels of greenhouse gases would cause a global warming. That is from a 1988 Shell confidential report on the greenhouse effect. So in 1988, Shell was already reporting on how their product could cause the kind of changes that we're seeing today. These documents go back actually further than 1988. There was pretty much consensus that climate change would happen and would impact society as far back as the 60s. Starting in 1977, ExxonMobil's own scientists warned them about this. So the oil companies and the gas companies and the coal companies, they knew that their product was going to cause changes. And I'll just jump ahead to one more sentence from this report. It says, however, by the time the global warming becomes detectable, it would be too late to take effective countermeasures to reduce the effects or even to stabilize the situation. Colleagues, that's where we are today. The changes are detectable now, and they are already causing immense damage, whether it be high heat, storms like the one that was in western North Carolina and could have those kind of severe storms as well. Flooding, we see a lot of flooding, even right here in Annapolis and around the state. There's potential for novel pathogens because of climate change. There's a lot of impacts that we're seeing from climate change. The oil and gas and coal companies knew 50 years ago and warned what would happen. But rather than changing their business model, they chose to hide what they knew and to deceive the public with, messaging about how, oh, we can't be sure that climate change is going to happen. They're telling the public we can't be sure. At the same time, they're writing these private reports that are pretty clear that they knew what was going to happen. And so this bill, so they followed the tobacco playbook. Just like the tobacco companies knew the danger of their product, and they hid it, and they deceived the public. Big oil has done the same thing. So just like with tobacco, we want to hold these oil companies accountable for their actions, just like we did with the tobacco companies. So this bill authorizes the Attorney General to file suit against any company whose actions contributed to the effects that we're seeing now, with some limitations to protect small businesses. We're not going after gas stations or retailers here. We're going after these huge multinational corporations that have known for over 50 years what was going to happen with their product and chose to hide it and deceive the public anyway. In addition to authorizing the Attorney General, this bill also creates a climate change restitution fund so that any money coming in from settlements or judgments would go into this fund, and it designates the uses that this fund could be put to, which is basically mitigating the harms caused by the climate change that's already happening now. There's also a climate change restitution advisory council in the bill. This was sort of, the fund and the advisory council were sort of loosely modeled on the opioid restitution fund and advisory council. I will note that the advisory council I placed with Maryland Department of Resilience. Their letter of testimony indicates that there's a lot of overlap with this, with the Maryland Commission on Climate Change. I'm certainly open to putting this under that commission if that's what this committee deems as best, if that makes it easier administratively and costs less money as well. And so finally, I just want to mention the Attorney General's letter, if you haven't seen it. The Attorney General supports in spirit, is what they say. They support this bill in spirit. They had a list of amendments and things that they need. We have gotten an amendment drafted, which I believe addresses all their concerns. I've sent that amendment to the committee and have also sent it to the Attorney General's office, have not received feedback from them yet about whether this addresses all of their concerns. But we are committed to working through with the Attorney General and making sure we're addressing all their concerns. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to my panelists, and I ask for a favorable report. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Who would like to go next?
Hello, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Jamie DeMarco. I'm representing the Chesapeake Climate Action Network. We urge a favorable report. Climate change is costing Maryland today. This is not a projection. This is not an estimate or a guess. It is coming out of line items today and contributing to the budget shortfall. Here in Annapolis, the city is spending more than $100 million updating the city dock because of chronic flooding caused by higher sea level. In all across the state, schools that never used to need air conditioning are having to pay to install air conditioning. In Baltimore City College, it was built in the 1800s, never used to need air conditioning. But now there are days in early June and in September where it is not safe to send a child into a room that doesn't have air conditioning because it is so hot. That didn't used to be the case. Spending a lot of money out of current state and local dollars to do that renovation. Similarly, Ellicott City experienced 2 once-in-a-thousand-year rain events within the span of 2 years. As a result, the county and the state are forced to solve for that rain event. What they're doing is drilling an 18-foot diameter drainage tunnel through granite bedrock underneath Ellicott City just to handle stormwater runoff. That's costing more than $228 million, similarly coming out of the state budget and the local budget. These are all costs we are all paying right now, and all of us as taxpayers are paying, and that are worsening our budget problems. We should not be paying these costs. As the delegate shared, the fossil fuel companies knew and lied about this problem and blocked action that would have solved it in the 90s. And as a result, we are where we are here, where we are today, and these companies should be the ones to pay, not Maryland taxpayers. We urge a favorable report. Thank you.
Please.
Madam Chair and Vice Chair and members of the committee, my name is Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, and I serve as a Maryland Climate Commissioner. I'm also the parent of a wonderful adult child with autism and cerebral palsy, and spent 9 years as the CEO of a Maryland-based disability organization. I strongly support this bill, which will make polluters pay for climate damage they've caused. This issue, as you heard from Delegate Ruth, is strikingly similar to what we saw with tobacco and opioids. I know these situations deeply and personally because I grew up in America's largest tobacco growing district. My father was the cancer doctor in that community. And the tobacco industry knowingly misled the public, cynically even giving free cigarettes to their own employees while concurrently denying the deadly link to cancer. Day after day, my father watched parents suffer and die. My father and his colleagues helped lead to a $246 billion settlement to states that saved lives and improved public health. Big oil and gas followed the same cruel and deceptive playbook, as you heard from Delegate Ruth, knowing for decades that their products were contributing to climate change and harming our health, yet prioritizing profit over responsibility. I currently live in Annapolis, where our neighborhood floods so often we can no longer obtain flood insurance. Meanwhile, more than 600,000 Marylanders with disabilities and chronic health conditions are disproportionately at risk from pollution and extreme weather. As a child, I was taught, if you break it, you bought it. These companies, they broke it. today as we face these mounting climate costs and major budget crisis, we should not put our financial shortfalls on the back of people with disabilities and other vulnerable people when we have not yet done our best to make polluters pay. I urge favorable consideration. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for questions now, and thank you for sharing your story, your personal story. Delegate Chisholm.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I find it curious that this has been brought by Anne Arundel County, Annapolis, Baltimore City, New Jersey, just lost yesterday, and New York lost. And the judges keep coming out with the same opinion that simply says federal law, not state law, governs climate and global pollution regulations. That's in the U.S. Constitution. I don't understand us just continuing to throw legal money when we're at a $3 billion deficit at precedent that's been pointed to by the court system over and over again, why we think this would be different this time. And I'm also curious on if you even talk to the rest of the Democratic caucus, because in the Democratic caucus briefing memo, which somebody sent me for the 2025 Leadership Energy Package, it clearly states expedition on approving new dispatchable generation, which equals natural gas, which I'm assuming you believe is causing climate change as well. Do you feel like the state should be able to supersede the federal government in this case? And do you feel like the Democratic caucus is wrong?
Thank you for the question, Delegate. So first of all, to take the question of these other suits, there are dozens of these suits around the country, some of them local, some of them state. And yes, a few of them have been ruled that I believe that they didn't have, I don't remember exactly what the ruling was, but as you said, there are judges that have ruled against in Baltimore and Anne Arundel County. However, first of all, those suits are being appealed. And so we don't know the final outcome of those suits at this point. Second of all, there are dozens of suits. These ones that have lost preliminary steps are only a small handful of the ones, and there have been some significant victories. In terms of superseding the federal government, this is not setting climate policy. This is about fiscal responsibility and about making sure that taxpayers are not on the hook for damages that have already been caused by these companies' actions. It's not about setting climate policy. It's about protecting the taxpayers, something I think every single one of us cares very much about, protecting the taxpayers. And because we are in a deficit, it's even more important than ever to protect the taxpayers and make sure that those who are responsible are the ones who are paying and not Maryland's taxpayers. And then in terms of the energy policy, I believe that's a different bill, not this one, and so I can't really comment on that. Thank you.
Can I ask one follow-up?
Yes.
Can I add to that?
You can't, but he can ask you a question.
Okay.
Yeah, you can take a shot at this. So scientists do believe that we've been through a mild warming. We've also gone through mild cooling. But what scientists don't agree on is it really being caused by CO2. So my question to you is, if we went net zero today, what should I expect the average temperature to go up or go down? What should I expect from these hurricanes? What should I expect? Should we not expect hurricanes? Should we not expect flooding? Should we not expect any deviation in temperature?
Who's the best person? Not the best person, but who has the best answer?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Thank you for the question, Delegate. Human combustion of fossil fuels has contributed to recent warming. I think there's consensus among the scientific community about that. As when we stop increasing the concentration of CO2, temperatures will stop rising. That doesn't mean the temperature will go back to what it was pre-industrial revolution, but the more we burn, the higher it goes, and the sooner we stop, the sooner it stops going up.
Do you agree that CO2 is a key component to life itself?
So is water, and you can still drown.
But we're not trying to get rid of water. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. May I ask, I like to ask your witness, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
Yes, Madam Chair, I wanted to answer the delegate's question about the Democratic Party's bill on fossil fuels. I am a Maryland Climate Commissioner. I have studied this a lot. I also happen to be a trustee of the Democratic Party and was proud to serve as a Harris delegate. And I will sadly say that the Democratic leadership that did introduce this bill has made a sad mistake. There is a separate bill with Lorig Cherkoutian and Senator Brooks that will solve the same energy crisis in a completely renewable way that will help lower prices of energy and will make sure that we have sustainable energy. And I think that over time, that through education and conversation, we'll get to a better bill. I think everyone involved is very well intended, but it is very clear that fossil fuels are a problem that caused climate change, and we should not be adding to that problem. So thank you for the incredibly important question, and I will just say that it is important to be nonpartisan when we look at these issues and just look at the science.
All right. Delegate Hill was first, and then Delegate Morgan.
Thank you. Thank you, Delegate Ruth, for this bill, and thank you all for being here. I just want to be clear about a couple things. I thought this bill was about responsibility, not about what our fuel mix is and renewable resources. And so my question is it not true that under Maryland and federal law, corporations are considered to be persons? And is it not true that our laws also hold people liable when actions that they have taken cause harm?
That is true. Thank you, Delegate.
Okay, and so am I right that this is about, it's not about hating people for making money, it's not about fuel sources, it's about saying you deliberately caused a harm, you have to take some responsibility for the mitigation of that harm?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Morgan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This bill feels a little bit like a shakedown on oil companies and energy producers. And I was just wondering, have you taken into consideration how this bill might affect the ratepayers as they are really lighting up our emails? I'm sure you've gotten some emails yourself into your office the last month or so as they're facing record high electric bills.
Thank you for the question, Delegate. We have not seen lawsuits like this on other products, like tobacco and opioids, increase the cost of the product they sell. That's in part because not every company in the industry pays. A small subset of the total companies in the industry would have to pay, and therefore market forces would keep them from passing that cost on to consumers because the companies that aren't paying into this are not going to raise their prices.
Quick follow-up.
Yes.
Would this bill also authorize the Attorney General to take action against not only companies that have detrimental climate change impact for Maryland, but really we're in a worldwide, the climate crosses state lines? Would this empower the Attorney General to sue in other states or maybe even other countries?
Thank you for the question, Delegate. This is really about Maryland. It is true that climate change is everywhere, but we are concerned about the impact in Maryland that Maryland taxpayers will have to pay for.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions? Delegate, and thank you for bringing the bill and for your testimony. You always do your homework. I enjoy your testimony.
Thank you.
I have a question regarding the Attorney General letter in page 2, where he says, currently, if the Attorney General settles a claim against one of several defendants, the state's ability to collect against the remaining non-settling defendant is reduced by an equivalent share based on the total number of defendants in the case, regardless of fault. Thus, it is practically impossible to settle with smaller, less culpable defendants in multi-defendant actions without the state giving up a large percentage of the state's total potential recovery. The practical impact of this has been to foreclose the possibility of settlements, leading to complex litigation on multiple fronts with high litigation costs and significant resource drain. And they would like the Yukuta statute, which is the Uniform Contribution Among Joint Tortfeasors Act, amended. Have you spoken to them about this, and what are they saying?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. Yes, we've had extensive conversations with the Attorney General's office, including about this particular issue, and we do understand why this is necessary. The amendment, which I have submitted to the committee, does actually give them this ability that they are asking for, with the change to the Uniform Contribution Among Joint Tortfeasors Act. That's a mouthful, I'm sorry. Basically, last session, we passed a bill authorizing lawsuits against the corporations responsible for the Key Bridge collapse, and as a part of that, it gave this ability to the Attorney General's office to settle under this statute.
That was Senate Bill 680?
Yes, Madam Chair. And so basically, in our amendments, what it does is it adds these particular suits in addition to the Key Bridge suits as ones that they can settle under this particular. So it would, I believe, resolve this issue.
All right. Will you be so kind and set up a meeting with them and discuss your amendment? Have them review it? Have they reviewed your amendment?
Madam Chair, I just got the amendments last night. I did
Okay.
send it to the Attorney General's office, and they only had it today, so.
Okay. So if you could follow up and meet with them, that would be great.
Thank you.
Okay.
We are ongoing discussing with them.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
I know you are. You always do your homework.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I don't see any other questions. Actually, let's see, 1 minute. Okay, so then the fiscal note, how will you address the fiscal note where it says it's potentially significant?
Yes, thank you for the question. The bill authorizes the Attorney General to hire outside counsel, including on a contingency basis if they choose to do that. But the Attorney General's office believes that they need a certain number of staff members in order to manage it, even if they do it with outside counsel. Unfortunately, there's no real way around that, but I would note that we have potentially millions, maybe 20s of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that we could get from these judgments or suits. So the Attorney General being able to hire staff to manage these, there would potentially be a huge return on investment to that. And also that they would not need, this bill doesn't require them to hire staff unless they decide to move forward. This bill does not require the Attorney General to file these suits. It gives the Attorney General the authorization to do that. And so they would be making the decision based on their capacity, their budget, and everything else on whether they move forward with these suits or not. The other significant component in the fiscal note is for the advisory council, the Climate Restitution Fund Advisory Council, for managing that and staffing that. And as I mentioned, the Maryland Department of Emergency Management had suggested that there's a lot of overlap with the Commission on Climate Change, and it might be possible, and I have not talked to anyone from the Commission on Climate Change because I just saw that today, but I will speak to them and see if that's something that could be put under their responsibility, and that might really reduce the fiscal burden there as well.
Wonderful. So in essence, this is just basically authorizing them to do it. They don't, we could pass the bill and they never, if they choose not to do it, they don't have to do it.
Yes, Madam Chair.
All right. All right, so keep us posted on your conversations with all the parties involved, okay?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Oh, Delegate Johnson, I apologize.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to ask another question. You mentioned the tobacco industry and those settlements. Wasn't Maryland just a recent recipient of the opioid settlements for this same exact reason? They caused harm to Maryland, so we went after them to help clean up their own mess.
Yes, thank you for the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My pleasure. You can't say we're not friendly here. Okay. Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for being with us, Delegate. We really appreciate you. We do have an unfavorable panel, which I'm going to call now, and that is in person by Mimi Schwartz. Are you here?
Yes.
Yeah, will you be so kind and come up and give us your testimony?
Which one do I go to?
Oh, whichever one you want. You want to sit in the middle?
Sure.
All right, and will you be so kind and pull the microphone closer to you? Delegate Hill really wants you to do that.
All right, testing. Can you hear?
Yeah, just pull it closer to you
Oh, okay.
so you can be more comfortable, okay?
How's that?
Thank you. That's perfect.
All right. I urge an unfavorable report. I'm opposed to this bill. Maryland may need to prepare for future weather events that cause flooding, or what they're calling sunny day flooding. But I suggest that instead of spending our money on trying to make others pay for it, why don't we just spend that money on the projects themselves? If the AG goes after the energy companies, they'll probably lose, like the one that was filed in '21, but recently dismissed on January 27th. And there's a high cost to all of that litigation. Who pays for it? Marylanders pay for their side of the litigation, and Marylanders pay for the oil companies to defend themselves in the form of higher energy costs. Someone a couple of minutes ago said, well, it won't necessarily come from Maryland Energy, it's going to be not necessarily us. Well, then somebody else said, but we're going to be targeting in favor of Maryland, so it would make sense that you go after Maryland energy companies. Who are they going to pass the higher rates to? The users of their energy. They have no choice. We wouldn't want to tick them off and have them close their doors so we wouldn't have any energy. They stay in business, we just get higher rates. And I don't see how the bill would benefit Marylanders directly from any payouts the AG worked so hard to get. It sounded like there would be a committee formed, but we don't know how they would choose to spend the money. Yet the citizens would pay a lot to do it, and we would tie up our courts and our legal systems. Please don't make us pay the cost of the needed projects twice. I urge an unfavorable report.
Thank you for coming here. We really appreciate it. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Oh, there is? Delegate Bagno.
Just for the record,
Could you state your name?
Mimi Schwartz.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you for being with us. This actually concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 340. Next, we have House Bill 806, and it is the Public Information Act frivolous, vexatious, or abusive request remedies. Good afternoon, how are you?
Good afternoon, fine, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you for asking. And whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Patrick Hughes. I am the Chief of the Opinions and Advice Division with the Maryland Office of the Attorney General. One of my roles is to supervise the production of our office's Public Information Act manual and to give advice on Public Information Act issues. And that's why I'm here today to talk to you about House Bill 806. Frivolous and vexatious PI requests are rare, but when they target an agency, they can disrupt the operations of government and make it hard for an agency to respond timely to legitimate requests from the press, members of the public, and others. That's why a few years ago, the General Assembly created a process for custodians to seek relief from the PIA Compliance Board from these types of requests. But frivolous requests continue to be a problem. I would point you toward the written testimony that you received from the Public Access Ombudsman in support of the bill, who explains how these instances of egregious misuse of the PIA continue. During the last year, the PIA Compliance Board heard its first cases under that new provision, and the experience revealed some ways the provisions could be improved and clarified. So more specifically, the bill would make 4 primary changes. The first change is the bill would add abusive to the list of requests for which a custodian could seek relief from the PI Compliance Board. So frivolous, vexatious, abusive, or in bad faith would be the full list. This would cover requests that are abusive in nature, for instance, harassing or personally attacking the custodian or government employees, but they might not be numerous enough to qualify as vexatious, as that term is often understood. And custodians shouldn't have to wait for these abusive requests to become numerous enough to qualify as vexatious before seeking relief. The second change, perhaps the most important one, is the bill would allow custodians to go directly to circuit court to seek an order that a request is frivolous, vexatious, abusive, or in bad faith. In our experience, when a vexatious or frivolous requester is truly gumming up the works of an agency, time is of the essence, and the agency needs faster relief than they can get through the PI Compliance Board process. And in addition, the PI Compliance Board doesn't have much authority to enforce its own orders at the end of its process. And so sometimes the courts and their authority are going to be necessary to actually solve the problem. And the Public Access Ombudsman, makes this point in her written testimony as well. And this also puts custodians on an equal playing field with requesters who can generally choose whether or not to use court to get dispute relief under the PIA or use the process through the Ombudsman and the PI Compliance Board. Third, the bill will clarify the type of relief that the PI Compliance Board or a court can provide. As written, the law isn't clear about how far the Compliance Board can go in precluding a frivolous or vexatious requester from submitting future PI requests. And the remedy is effectively meaningless if the PICB or court can only permit the agency to ignore the single request that spurred the complaint. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. The PICB's regulations already interpret the statute to give it some latitude in this area, but the bill would clarify the exact scope of relief that the Compliance Board or a court could give. And then finally, this is actually a related but somewhat separate problem. The bill would also give the PI Compliance Board more control over its own docket by allowing it to dismiss complaints to it that are frivolous, vexatious, or in bad faith. So the PI Compliance Board gets some complaints that are completely frivolous, don't raise any legitimate issues about the PIA, and they've recently been flooding the PI Compliance Board, leaving that agency with a backlog and making it difficult for it to get quickly to its more substantive cases. And so this would allow the PI Compliance Board to focus on those more substantive issues and allow it to dismiss these frivolous complaints out of hand and get to the more important matters. So in sum, I urge a favorable report on House Bill 806 and happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for this witness? I have first Delegate Olston, followed by Chisholm.
Thank you. I'm curious how this isn't an infringement upon the freedom of press. And I'm also concerned about why this isn't currently covered under the bad faith provision of the current law.
In terms of the word abusive, is that what the question is? Yeah. So I'll take the first part of your question first about the press. I think I would be quite surprised if this provision were ever used in an attempt to say that a request from the press was frivolous, vexatious, abusive, or in bad faith. The archetype kind of situation that we're talking about are requesters who are asking the agency for the same documents over and over again, or have a personal axe to grind against an agency or a person at the agency. It's unlikely that this would be used to challenge requests from the press, I think, is a practical matter. There have only so far been 3 or 4 of these cases that have made their way to the PI Compliance Board, and none of them involved members of the press. That's not the focus of this. Second, in terms of your question about in bad faith, if the committee in the General Assembly is comfortable that the current language of frivolous, vexatious, and in bad faith is broad enough to cover requests that are sort of personally attacking custodians and harassing them, then we just want to make sure that sort of conduct is covered by the scope of this, and think adding abusive to the list would clarify that. But ultimately, that's of course a decision for the General Assembly.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Someone said they love having the lawyer on the committee. No. They said they love it, so you keep it on. You keep us straight. Delegate Chisholm, followed by Johnson, followed by Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am not a lawyer, but I'm going to probably, yeah. I'm going to follow up on her questions. Because to me, I'm just going to speak for myself, but I'm sure it applies to a lot of other elected officials in here. One of the toughest things we deal with is the public feeling like they are held in the dark. They don't get to see anything, and there's a lot of things done in secret, and they don't know what's going on. And their only outlet really sometimes is to try to see these documents for themselves. My concern is it seems like a lot of the language in here is very subjective. So who is, can one person be making this decision that this is, we provided this last month, we're not going to do it again? And do we then become contradictory what we should be as a government, in that we should be open and transparent? We are the consent of the governed. We are here because of them, and they should have access to everything we have. And I'm sure, I don't doubt you that there's probably some crazy requests, and it may seem abusive at times, and that should be stamped out. I understand that, but it really does feel like we're once again taking one step closer to, we don't want the public to see what we do, which creates an even bigger problem for trust. We have a trust problem in this country and in all of government now between the people we govern and the people that govern. And I'm afraid that this goes in contradiction to trying to rebuild that trust. Do you think that I am off base on my logic?
I think the Attorney General's office would agree that public access is very important. In part of our role in advising all of our client agencies, it's often saying this type of information needs to be disclosed under the Public Information Act because the act requires it. And so I think I agree with the spirit of what you're trying to communicate. One thing to be very clear about is under the existing law and under this bill, which would tweak the existing law in some ways, it's not the custodian, the individual government employee who has the records, that gets to decide whether the request that is coming is frivolous, vexatious, in bad faith, or abusive, if we were to add that to the list. It's under current law, it's the compliance board, the PI compliance board, which is an independent appointed body by the governor, or under our proposal, either the compliance board or a circuit court, a judge. And so there is a neutral third party of some sort that would be deciding. And the other point I want to highlight is that custodians have used this process very lightly. It's really for the egregious instances of requests where it's gumming up the works of an agency and keeping it from responding to all of the requests that you're talking about or concerned about, and they're absolutely important for the government to respond to. And I don't anticipate these changes would cause government agencies to take that decision less lightly in terms of when they're going to invoke this protection. And obviously there are costs to going through this process as well that wouldn't take unless it was really a problem.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome, and you can ask your questions anytime. It was, if I recall, Delegate Johnson followed by Hill, correct? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming to explain some of the stuff in this bill.
Sure.
It's kind of piggybacking off of Delegate Chisholm's concern. In paragraph 3, it says, provide any other monetary relief that in the board's discretion is appropriate under the circumstances. So I don't want to see us get into, you mentioned an axe to grind. I don't want to see us get into a reverse axe to grind and taking it out on the public. And shouldn't there be some guardrails around that to where the public knows exactly what they're getting into, what penalties or monetary relief they would get into if they abused the transparency process?
So I believe, unless there's a typo in the bill, I think it's non-monetary relief. So it's making clear that the government can't seek monetary relief. It's, they can seek injunctive type relief to keep the requester from harassing the agency, for instance.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Hill, your question.
I do. I know it's a surprise. Thank you, Madam Chair.
No, I'm not surprised. You're right.
Excuse me.
Now I'm intrigued, now I'm, challenged to. So, I guess following up on my colleagues' questions, I'm actually reading a letter of opposition that has a couple of points that I think are really germane and we should have answers to.
Sure.
One.
If I may, is that the letter from the Writerstown
This is-
gentleman?
From
Mr.
Writerstown gentleman, correct?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay. All right. So there are three major points he makes. One is that if this council or commission can authorize a custodian to ignore a citizen's future request, regardless of whether those requests are also frivolous, vexatious, abusive, or in bad faith, what the heck are we doing, right? So that's the first part. The second part, if a person, a citizen, I'm not even talking about the press, can be banned forever from receiving any records they might request, what are we doing, right? And where's that transparency? We're sort of punishing people for having asked for something. I mean, it seems to be an assumption that they knew that what they were doing was not in good faith, as opposed to they really thought they had a right to it, and now this group is saying, actually, what you're doing is out of line. And I know that's one of the choices, but even giving that choice does not give the presumption that now I know better and I'll do better. And then the third point is that by giving them the authority to sue, for the custodian to sue the citizens because you're a pain in my behind, that's a problem, it would seem to me. So can you address that and then tell us what is the main piece you want? Because there's a lot in here, and I suspect it's just the vexatious part that you want.
So let me try to make sure I answer each part of your question. So on the first piece, which was, if I'm remembering correctly,
I can ban you from future, you
yes,
can't make any future
right.
requests. I don't have to deem those to be.
Yeah, the idea, more generally speaking, is to give either the compliance board and or a court, whatever ends up being the decision, the discretion to make the remedy match the problem, and not to suggest that that would be the normal instance where someone would be prohibited from seeking future PI requests, but to have that in the sort of quiver of arrows that the compliance board or a court could use in particularly egregious instances. One thing I'll say, that the language is based in part on a Connecticut public record statute where they have a similar body that has the ability to handle these types of requests. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think the Connecticut statute might put an outward limit of a year or something on the period of time that the agency can, that body, that commission can say. Right, but this doesn't. So that would be one thing we'd certainly be open, I think, to discussing with interested parties. And then I'm sorry, the second
And so
piece
then was
of the
about
question.
banning them from receiving any records in the future, which is the same.
Yeah, it's the same issue.
Idea,
Yeah.
right? And again, thanks for correcting that it's a board, not a commission, or I've misused that word.
No, that's all right.
And then the third part is then the custodian can be authorized to sue them. But if I'm being a nuisance, if I'm being a pest, if I'm badgering you, and that's been determined, doesn't the custodian have some civil rights to sue me anyway? I mean, why are we giving additional, I mean, if I'm being pestered by somebody, can't I go to court and say I'm being harassed?
I'm sure. I'm not sure that's ever happened in this kind of context because it would be the individual employee having to bring the action as opposed to their employer
Right, or the organization.
being able to bring the action, which has its own. I mean, I want to be clear that the informal dispute resolution process through the ombudsman, through the PI compliance board would still exist. And I think, and there are different costs to going to court versus trying to use one of those processes. And if it's an instance where it isn't especially egregious and not really disrupting the operations of the agency, I would think in terms of a cost-benefit analysis that their approach would be to go seek mediation first and try to deal with it through the informal dispute resolution process. The option for filing an action in circuit court is really just meant as an escape valve for situations that can't be solved without the power of a court to step in and help resolve them.
Okay, and then the final question was, so what is the piece that you really want here? Because you've asked for a lot.
Sure. I mean, I think the ability to go to court in egregious cases and some clarification about the scope of the compliance board or a court to prohibit future requests, at least on the same or similar types of issues, so that the requester, it's not a game of whack-a-mole, in other words, that the requester can't just come back repeatedly after the compliance board issues an order saying, you don't have to respond to this request anymore. Then they, file a new request that is, only slightly different from what was filed before, and then you have to go through the whole process again, potentially. I think those are the two most important aspects from the Office of the Attorney General's perspective. I think, adding the list of abusive is meant to clarify, I think, that, abusive requests, that personally attack members of the government are problematic, but if the committee thinks that's already sort of captured by the spirit of what we have, I could certainly understand that.
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair, for your indulgence.
Not a problem. I expect you not to have any more for the remainder of the day.
Until the next bill.
I think you have to see. Let's see. Delegate Riley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we've kind of confirmed that the language in the bill is definitely subjective. And you keep using the word in most of your answers to your testimony so far, the word egregious request. Can you give us maybe some examples of what you believe are egregious requests? And do you have data on that of, within maybe a year's time frame? I mean, is it one person is doing this 100 times, or is it, 3 people doing it 50 times? Some kind of data on what made you come up with this particular bill and what's the major issue?
Sure. So I don't want to make this a request about make this bill about particular people or particular requests, because I don't think that's appropriate. It's about a type of request, but I can certainly point the committee to the decisions that the PI Compliance Board has issued this past year, or last year in 2024. They were the first cases to come up under this statute that we're seeking to amend. And I think you will see some examples of conduct that has been very disruptive to agencies. And as the Public Access Ombudsman points out in her written testimony, she does get cases like this. It's a small subset of what she gets, but she does get them, and they continue to be an issue, and one that, if a requester's true purpose is to, be abusive or to be vexatious or to act in bad faith, it's hard to correct that through mediation with the ombudsman, or even sometimes hard to correct through action by the PI compliance board. That's why we're here.
I guess, for my purposes, I would appreciate if the bill was a little bit more clearer and to the point what we're trying to prevent. And I think, Delegate Hill kind of mentioned the same thing. I think we'd be a little bit more comfortable with, but thank you so much for your answer.
Sure. Yeah, and of course, we're happy to continue conversations.
And that is actually great advice, because there's a lot in the bill. And we are all, as you can see the questions, right? And this is a pretty, we read everything and it's a thoughtful process. I would think about what do you really need, right, from the bill, and try to work that way with the members, okay? I have Delegate Bagnall, followed by Delegate Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for coming and speaking with us today. Can you help us understand the expertise of the State Public Information Act Compliance Board and how they are appointed, or how you define that membership?
Sure, yeah. So it's a 5-member board appointed by the governor. There are, and I apologize, I don't have the statute in front of me that is the composition of the board, but I believe there is one member who is supposed to be a representative of the requester community, and one member who is supposed to be representative of the custodian community, have experience, being a records custodian. I think at least one member has to be a lawyer, and at least one member has to have experience with digital records of some sort. So it's a body that is supposed to, with those component parts, have various types of expertise that are useful in trying to interpret Maryland's Public Information Act. And so in the same bill that created this process for challenging frivolous, vexatious, in bad faith PI requests that we've been talking about, it also expanded the jurisdiction of the PI Compliance Board in a couple of other ways as well, including allowing requesters to file complaints with the PI Compliance Board alleging that the government agency improperly withheld material that the members of the public were entitled to see, and also fee disputes and things like that. So the primary substantive expertise that they're bringing to the table, I think, is about the interpretation of the PIA and public access to records and things like that. And I know their work has been slowed over the last year by sort of complaints coming from both sides related to frivolous, vexatious, in bad faith PI requests.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My pleasure, Delegate Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't question the intention of the bill, and the bill itself on page 3, lines 3 to 6. When I read the bill, I've few concerns if you could address. Number one is the bill grants broad discretion to agencies to claim a request as a vexation or abusive, right? I don't find the clear, narrowly defined criteria. And another one is individual or organization may hesitate to file requests for fear of being labeled as vexation and abusive. That's another concern. And another concern is there is an ambiguity, like what constitutes abusive. It's more like subjective interpretation. It leaves the room for subjective interpretation. And another is future request on similar topic may be blocked if it is not clear. And the last one is what is the stronger oversight and safeguard that these individuals will be requesting are not disproportionately used, or whatever this bill, not used against certain groups or topics. So I think the intention of this bill is wonderful, but it should be narrowed, and it should be more objective one rather than subjective.
So the first part of your question about what's on page 3, lines 3 through 5. That's the last piece that I spoke about in my introductory testimony that is a slightly different issue than the issue of frivolous or vexatious PI requests. That was, the focus of what we're talking about. That is about the PI Compliance Board itself, its ability to manage its own caseload. Because over the past year, it has gotten a lot of requests that, I'm sorry, and now I'm confusing the matter, lots of complaints that on their face just don't have any merit to them whatsoever. And what a court would normally be able to do is just, dismiss those out of hand, for instance. But the PI Compliance Board can't do that. It asks, the government agency for a response. It puts together a full written decision. And as I was just explaining to Delegate Bagnell, that then backs up its ability to issue decisions on more substantive issues. Again, we're happy to work with this committee, with anyone else, to figure out ways to, specifically tailor the language of the bill to the problems that are trying to solve. But that particular piece you were pointing to, that's the intent behind that piece.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Whiteholland.
Chair, and I believe that you recall, you mentioned that there were just a handful of these cases that were found. Could you further expound upon what were the outcomes of some of those particular cases and how they've moved forward?
Sure. Excuse me. So 2 of the cases involved related fact patterns. And in both of those, the PI Compliance Board found that the requests, or the pattern of requests, was frivolous, vexatious, or in bad faith, ordered the agency didn't have to respond to those requests. Those are now being appealed through the court system, through the judicial review mechanism, but government agencies still continue to have issues related to that pattern of requests. The third, the Compliance Board found that the pattern of requests was not frivolous, vexatious, or in bad faith, and that's also on appeal in judicial review before a circuit court right now. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'm really trying to do the one question, but
that's fine.
Yes, it's one question. And then a second bite.
To a new policy. If she has too many, I have to decide on that number. She has to pay us. She has to buy dinner for us.
I agree. Second. Did you just say they're cases that are still in active litigation that this law is seeking to change?
There are cases on appeal before the courts, yes, that are about this law, yeah.
Do you have those case sites or names?
So I not off the top of my head, I can send you, there have not been, to my knowledge, any appellate court decisions yet on them, so they would be, circuit court decisions, and I certainly have the PI Compliance Board decisions on those matters that I can send to the committee, and I can send them to the chair or committee counsel, however you would prefer.
Yes, if you could share with the whole committee, we'd like to share.
Sure.
That would be great, both cases and the circuit court cases as well. Thank you.
Yeah, happy to.
I don't see any other questions, but I am going to do something a little bit unusual, but not surprising. I'd like you to get in touch with the chair of the committee, which is Delegate Kerr, with Delegate Hill and Alston and Bandari, Chisholm. See what it is that you really want, right? Because it's so broad. And I've been sitting here reading the same letter that we're all reading, and the opposition who's going to come next. And I would love to help, but I want it to be very narrow and to see what it is you really need, right? As well, maybe. I'm not making any promises. Of
course, yeah.
But if you could do that, that would be great, okay?
Yeah, happy to participate however would be helpful.
Thank you. I'm going to actually, you know what, I'm going to do something different now. Let me call and unfavorable right now as well. Thank you and thank you for being so patient as you handle all these questions.
Sure,
okay?
yeah, and I'll be back for a bill next, so, thank you.
Let me call Rebecca Snyder. Let me start with you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Rebecca Snyder, Executive Director of the Maryland-Delaware DC Press Association. I'm also, as you can see in our testimony, the ACLU Common Cause Maryland, Disability Rights, and the Public Justice Center have signed on to our testimony, and because the broadcasters aren't here, I'm carrying their opinions as well. Essentially, what you've heard is that there have been some cases that that the PIA Compliance Board and custodians have really had a hard time with. And those vexatious and frivolous requests, we don't discount that they exist in the world. We feel like this is just an oversized reaction to what is essentially 1% of the caseload of the Ombudsman and the PIA Compliance Board. What we're hearing is this really super broad, abusive, all the powers you can handle, but let it rain on members of the public. Mr. Hughes was completely right. We don't expect that the press would ever be kind of involved in these types of requests, but the Public Information Act is for the public. The press is just a stand-in for the public in those ways. In our testimony, there's links to two high flyer cases, I guess. I don't know if those are the ones under appeal, and those are pretty egregious. Let's not get it wrong. But what we're finding is that the PIA Compliance Board did rule on that. The process is working. They are issuing opinions which will create precedent that custodians can then act on, and they're all in litigation. So I think the stakes are really high here. Like, why are we going so big with this really broad bill that has really large repercussions on how the public perceives the information that's coming along to them without letting the process play through? So we're willing to work together with people, but right now we are very unfavorable. Thank you.
All right, pretty clear. All right. Let's go back to a favorable. May I have, will you be so kind and please pull up the virtual witness that is favorable, which is the Maryland Association of Counties, Mr. Michael Sanderson?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Hi, how are
committee
you?
members. I'm Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties. I know on the door into your committee room, health gets top billing, but some nerds out here really love Health and Government Operations Day. So happy to be here for that. I'll also abbreviate my comments today in support of the bill, just in light of the committee's, I think, insightful questions and comments so far. And if I'm reading the room, it sounds like the committee may be working in the direction of a work group to take these issues up. I'll add one thing. We'd like to have local governments as part of that effort if that goes forward. But I'll just say in particular, we think the spinal cord of this bill, the centerpiece of this bill, is a good idea to proceed with in whatever way you see fit. If we need to nail down a definition or two or be more precise or be more specific, that may serve everybody well. And I think the caution that some of the committee members and the press have raised are very reasonable. But at the same time, the core idea of this bill, we have custodians who bear personal liability for making all these decisions correct. Under the PIA, there's a presumption that information is public, and then there are a long series of exceptions like we're talking about here, where you don't share that information, even if it's held by a public entity. For them to have a process to say, this is too much, I need guidance, and have a way for them to go upstairs and get clear guidance is a really good part of this law and a sensible thing to enact in whatever way that you see fit. We're happy to be helpful if we can, but we support the bill, certainly in concept and much of the spirit.
Perfect. Look at your timing. Wow. All right. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us. Let's go favorable. John Galbraith? Oh, we actually used your letter. Did you like that? Or were you thinking, wow?
I heard a letter being referenced, and some of the subjects were the same. I was like, boy, that person really agrees with me.
You can, if you were probably thinking, wow, I wonder if they really read the stuff.
Oh, no. My wife tells me you all really read them and care about them.
So
Because I asked her that, because this is my first time ever coming to testify, and I asked her, she said, oh, don't worry, they see it and they read it.
It dialed 911. Oh, my God. Sorry about that. I apologize. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll just get right into it then. Madam Chair and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm John Galbraith, a citizen who cares deeply about the Public Information Act. I oppose this bill because it goes against the foundational principles of the PIA, which are that all persons are entitled to have access to information about the affairs of government, and that this right must be construed in favor of allowing inspection of a public record. Even the AG's own PIA manual says at the very start, and I quote, the Maryland Public Information Act is based on the enduring principle that public knowledge of government activities is critical to the functioning of a democratic society, that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people must be open to the people. Here are 3 concrete reasons why this bill goes against the PIA's fundamental principles. First, under this bill, custodians can be authorized to ignore a future request on the same or similar topics as a past request, even if the future request is not frivolous or vexatious. Requests should be judged on their own merits, and with this bill, they won't be. Second, this bill allows a custodian to receive any other non-monetary relief against a citizen or organization. So there's basically no limit on what a custodian can be authorized to do. A citizen organization could be banned from receiving any records they might request on any topic. And this total ban can be for any specified period of time, which could be 5 years, 20 years, or even the lifetime of the citizen organization. That is draconian. Third, this bill gives custodians a broad new right to sue citizens and organizations directly in circuit court without having the PIA's compliance board weigh in the matter. This threat of direct court action by the AG's office will have a profound chilling effect on citizens and organizations who request public records, including the press. This chilling effect may be what the AG's office is looking for, but it does not comport with the Act's foundational principles. We should not add draconian punishments to the PIA, nor should we add the threat of direct lawsuits by the state against citizens and organizations who request access to information about the workings of their government. If anything, we should be making the PIA more citizen-friendly and less restrictive. Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today.
Time to come today. We appreciate you. Are there any questions for this witness? Delegate Hill.
First of all, thank you for the letter. Thank you for taking the time. I just want to ask you one question. I don't know what kind of advocacy you've done and what kind of PIA requests you may have made or organizations. Would you agree that there are sometimes citizens groups or interest groups separate from the press that may use PIA requests as a tool, sometimes in a harassing way, to push policy points, that they're going to continue to ask and ask and ask to push policy points, whether at the school board level or at the local level or thing? Do you have any thought about that?
Well, I don't know, actually. I'm not familiar with any situation that has occurred along those lines. I can't say it could never happen, but if you look at the language in this bill, it's pretty draconian. I mean, it's the hammer of the state coming down. And as a matter of fact, the assistant AG even used the words quiver, another arrow in the quiver. You really want to have an arrow shooting the citizens of Maryland when they're just asking for information about the workings of their government? We ought to be pretty liberal about that. I mean, open and transparent government is the cornerstone of a free and democratic society. And this bill would usher in a new era of closed not open government, and opaque, not transparent government. So I'm not sure what I directly answered, but I'd say the direct answer is I don't really know of any organization that's done that. But we sure ought to, I think, lean on the side of allowing that rather than hammering that.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Don't see any other questions. Thank you so much for your testimony and for coming today, okay?
You're very welcome. I appreciate it.
There are no other unfavorable, so I'm going to call the favorable panel. I have B. Andrew Bright, Joshua McCauley, and will you be so kind and please bring the virtual witness, favorable witness, and that will be it for this bill. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
Good afternoon. Will you be so kind and get started?
Certainly.
Thank you.
For the record, my name's Andrew Bright. I'm the legal advisor to the Washington County Sheriff's Office, here also on behalf of the Maryland Sheriffs and Maryland Chiefs of Police Association in support of HB 806. I'd ask this question, and I think it addresses some questions that were asked earlier. Can you imagine, and maybe this has happened to you, that you received a series of emails or other communications that contained vulgar accusations toward you, personal attacks, homophobic diatribes, personal comments about your appearance or your race, or maybe these are directed to a subordinate of yours? How do you respond to those? Typically in our actions in life, if somebody says ignorant things like that, our best reaction is to ignore them. And that's what I think most of us would do, unless it was actionable or we could file suit. The problem is, what if there's a PIA request that's buried in the middle or at the bottom of these ignorant attacks? Now, by statute, there's no ability to ignore it whatsoever. And when your predecessors 55 years ago enacted the PIA, I don't believe that they intended for public servants to be subjected to just strings of abuse on a daily basis. I don't think that was their intent. We answer hundreds of PIAs in the sheriff's office. We firmly believe in an open and transparent government, but on those very rare occasions of abuse, we believe that this bill would enable us to receive some relief and would free up staff time to answer legitimate and frankly civil requests from members of the press and other people who have presented here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm Captain Josh McCauley, also of the Washington County Sheriff's Office, here in support of House Bill 806. I'll reiterate what my colleagues said, that the Washington County Sheriff's Office firmly believes in the principles of the Maryland Public Information Act, and we strive daily to operate in a manner consistent with the mandate of openness and transparency with the citizens of our community. Unfortunately, in some instances, this PIA process and its legitimate goals have been hijacked by bad actors who in bad faith flood public agencies with frivolous, insulting, and degrading requests intended to harass public officials and public servants and tie up the already limited resources of governments. The current complaint process, which only allows for relief on a particular PIA request, is cumbersome, providing no hope of long-term relief from these bad actors. This bill, if passed, will allow for local filing of PIA-related complaints, with potential repercussions for those bad actors that go beyond the lone PIA request in question. This bill strikes a much-needed balance between the public's right to information regarding their government agencies and protecting the valuable resources and people that make up local governments in this state. The Washington County Sheriff's Office urges this committee to help restore balance to the Maryland PIA process and to please forward a favorable report for House Bill 806. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Next, please, virtually, Ms. Anderson, Wright. Ms. Laura Anderson Wright, can you please unmute yourself and give us your testimony? please. Hi.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you.
Can you please unmute yourself and give us your testimony?
Hey,
It's
I
okay,
think I'm
don't worry.
unmuted.
If
Can
you
you hear me?
could, I can hear you. If you could just turn off whatever it is that you're listening to, that you have us on, that would be great.
Yeah. Everybody. Oh, man. Okay.
All right?
Hopefully that's better. I had the stream open as well.
No, it's okay. It's all right. It happens. Take a deep breath.
Too many buttons.
It's okay. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing, Delegate Penny Melnick?
I'm doing well. You
I am
can get started.
Back in front of the committee again. I
It's okay.
serve as Senior Associate General Counsel for the University of Maryland, College Park, where I also serve as the university's Public Records Officer. I am pleased to support this bill and hope you come out with a favorable report. I was happy to follow and hear from my colleagues in the Washington County Sheriff's Office, because what you haven't heard are from people who are actually on the ground trying to fulfill the requests. Now, I've been the university's Public Records Officer for almost 30 years. I make 30 years come March. And in calendar year 2023 alone, we had 532 requests where we provided $1.7 million, $1.7 million records to the general public. But it becomes very difficult to provide top-notch customer service and abide by the statutory deadlines when you're processing requests such as these, which can be very abusive and clog up the pipeline, as I call it. When you receive 186 requests in a 12-month period from one person, that is abusive. That's a perfect example for you, Delegate Riley. It undermines the efficient and effective processing of the requests and ruins the process for everyone else. When you are threatened with physical harm, if you do not produce a voluminous amount of records within 10 business days, as they think the statute requires, that is abusive. I have suffered not through one, but two stalkers based on my state duties at the University of Maryland, College Park. I have had a colleague at another system institution swatted because of a public records request. Responding to the same request repeatedly is not functional. It doesn't work. It breaks the spirit and the letter of what the MPIA is trying to achieve here. And we have a chance to be proactive. I recognize the committee has questions about what they feel is rather subjective, and it is true. We are talking about a relative minority of the cases, but they take up the majority of the time and undermine what we're trying to do here. When comprehensive amendments, attempts to amend the statute in 2021 were ignored, and these words of vexatious and frivolous and bad faith were not defined, we're simply trying to work with the limited tools we as custodians are given to try and make the MPIA better and actually work for all Marylanders. I plead for a favorable report, and thank you for your indulgence.
I have Delegate Chisholm, followed by Olston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, we're looking at a situation where a couple bad actors can have an inadvertent solution hoisted on other people. And to her great wisdom, the chairman asked this earlier, and I think it would be a great idea, because I understand the problem you're facing, for you to possibly reach out to all of us. And because you're a lawyer, Mr. McCauley, I think I heard you say, okay, whoever wants to be the lawyer, come up with language that you think could solve this problem without having a negative effect across the board on everybody else that is legitimately just trying to get information. I understand we want to root out all of these bad actors. There's no perfect solution to that, but I also don't want to throw this very subjective, broad-reaching law into effect that could have a very negative effect on everybody else. And so I'll task you with, if you can come up with, this is too broad for me. I understand your point, I promise you. And those people are horrible what they're doing. But I don't want to once again feel like the people that I have been consented to govern feel like they're pushed out because of a couple bad actors, and that's not the way our system should run. So if you can, put your heads to that, I would greatly appreciate it, especially because I know this will be in my subcommittee.
We're certainly amenable to working on whatever language would address the problem. In a matter of trying to provide some reassurance, I can inform you, we have yet to file any complaints with the Compliance Board, mostly because it was in the spirit of our agency to provide all just give it to them. Here, if they were asking for records, here, just let them have the records. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that a couple of bad actors have really monopolized time and tested us.
Thank you. Delegate Alston.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. And, I want to thank you for sharing your personal story. My first job out of law school, I was chief of staff and a PIA officer, so I get it. It was the Department of Corrections, and we got all kinds of ungodly things in the mail, biological ungodly things. So I understand your concern. However, I am deeply concerned about limiting access to government in this day and age with everything that we are currently going through. And so if it is a legitimate PIA request, we fill the request. That's what we're charged with doing as custodians. And if it's not, we deny it. And if it's bad faith or abusive, you have the authority to deny it, and we can charge for those things, right? So if it's like lots of documents, there's the ability for the state to add a, you're shaking your head, you can't charge for it. But I think looking at a form or a form that doesn't give people the ability to write letters and send you things that are inappropriate may be the direction, without giving some person and denying people due process the ability to say, we're just going to ignore your request forever because we believe that what you have done has been to engage in abusive conduct. Because I don't see anything in this bill that gives due process, true substantive due process, to the people that would end up on this banned list that we may be creating unintentionally. So I look forward to working with you all, but there are some deep concerns about what we're doing in this day and age to limit people's access to information. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions. I do, however, would like Ms. Anderson-Wright just to have the perspective of the university join this little subgroup that Delegate Kerr doesn't know he's leading, but he is going to be able to lead it with the members that I outlined, which will be great, okay? And feel free to join as well, okay? Yes. Delegate Martinez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Anderson-Wright, it looked like you were trying to respond on the fact about charging. I would love to learn more about this. I'm really intrigued. I have a position, but I would love to learn more. If you could discuss what you wanted to add, I would appreciate it.
Yes, it is true. Delegate Alston is 100% correct. The statute lays out an opportunity for a requester to have the first 2 hours of time that is spent on a request gratis, and any time thereafter, an invoice can be sent. Of the hundreds of requests just the College Park campus has received, the boilerplate language includes a request for a fee waiver. Absolutely everybody asks for a fee waiver. We get requests, and the highest that I have seen in my career is for 1,750,000 pages of emails where a fee waiver was requested. And the fight for reduced fees and complete fee waivers is very, very strong. So and we already right now have an unfortunate opinion at the Public Information Act Compliance Board level that does not actually take into account the actual costs that an agency incurs when records have to be reviewed. They greatly reduced the formula away from the actual cost it takes to process in an effort to provide records. So yes, it's written in the statute, but in practice, the agency loses so much time and resources in trying to process the more voluminous requests. And the idea that we can simply charge isn't correct in practice.
You have a follow-up?
Because if we are waiving cost on something that we can't necessarily afford, is it something that your office has the authority to waive or to offer that waiver, or is that something that someone else is then granting that you then have to fulfill?
The answer is actually both. Agencies have the opportunity to waive fees at their level right when the requester makes the request for a fee waiver. If that fee waiver is denied, and the cost is over $350, which for tens of thousands of email records, it inevitably is. $350 threshold is truly very, very low. They can file a complaint with the ombuds officer, Ms. Kirshner, who's in that role right now. She tries to mediate. Of course, the requester wants zero. The agency wants the actual costs through its formula that it's calculated. And if an agreement cannot be reached, the board actually can step in and recalculate as they deem appropriate what the cost should be. It is lower than the actual costs in time that it takes to process the request. That is what has happened. Alternatively, if a fee waiver is denied, a requester also has the opportunity to go to circuit court and get relief that way. So there are a lot of tools, and I'll stick with the metaphor of arrows in the quiver of requesters. There are very, very few arrows and tools that agencies have in order to protect the taxpayers while still honoring the spirit and letter of the Maryland Public Information Act.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Delegate Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, the intent of the bill is wonderful, but why rush to give agencies broad this discretion to deny requests instead of working to improve the PIA's existing safeguards against those abuse?
Who's the?
Honestly gives, I'm sorry, was that question for me?
Who are you asking the question for?
To MCPA or MSA, the Maryland Chief of Police Association.
Okay.
And the Maryland Sheriff Associations.
Okay.
You know, as I understand it, the bill would not give discretion to the agency to deny, but it would give the ability of the agency to seek relief from either the compliance board or a circuit court judge to make that decision. And, you know, going to the question of due process, I'm certain that the compliance board will give a fair hearing, an opportunity to be heard to both parties. I'm also quite certain, having practiced in circuit court off and on for a few years now, that the circuit court judges will afford due process, opportunity to be heard, opportunity to point out legal authority, and frankly, an opportunity to litigate and create a judicial gloss on what does the term abusive mean, or what factors would we look to define whether something was in bad faith or vexatious beyond Webster's dictionary. So I believe that the bill does address those concerns, at least to that extent.
Thank you.
Ms. Anderson-Wright, did you want to add to that? Okay. I was
No, what
following
he
Delegate
said.
Martinez's lead. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Okay. So this actually, I believe, these are the last witnesses. They are. We'll conclude the bill hearing on House Bill 806. I want to thank you for being with us today and providing your testimony. For those of you that are still waiting to provide your testimony. Thank you for being patient. As you see, we're getting through it, but we're being thorough, right? And I'm sure you appreciate that. So since we concluded 806, let's move on now to House Bill 821, which is the Attorney General again. Are you ready for second bite? All right, Public Information Act denial pending litigation. This one should be a little easier, right?
It's a shorter bill, certainly.
Okay.
I'm going to sit in a different chair this time.
Okay.
All right.
Maybe that'll be lucky for you. Go ahead.
All right. Hello again, Patrick Hughes, Chief of the Opinions and Advice Division from the Maryland Office of the Attorney General. And this time I'm here in support of HB 821 with amendments. So this bill would create a new exemption in the PIA that would allow, but not require, a custodian to withhold certain records relating to pending or reasonably anticipated litigation until that litigation is over. And it would be in addition to any other exemptions like the attorney-client privilege or attorney work product that might apply to some, but not all, of those records. Before we dive in, I want to make sure you're aware in our written testimony, based on concerns raised by stakeholders after the initial introduction of the bill, OAG is proposing amendments to clarify and narrow the scope of the original language that was in the bill is introduced. And so as amended, the bill would apply to records compiled or created because of pending or reasonably anticipated litigation, rather than more broadly what it said before, just records, quote unquote, pertaining to pending or reasonably anticipated litigation. So it's compiled or created because of that litigation would be the scope of this protection. And the idea behind this legislation is it would help even the playing field between government litigants and private litigants by placing at least some limits on the ability of opposing litigants to use the PIA to circumvent discovery rules or obtain records for their litigation that they wouldn't be able to obtain in discovery. And similar exemptions exist for similar reasons in at least 7 other states that we found. And of course, government agencies don't have the same ability to use a public records law offensively in litigation with private parties. So as explained in our written testimony, these aren't just theoretical concerns, lays out a few examples of this happening in practice. I don't want to belabor all of that here, but sometimes PI requests, often from third parties allied with litigants rather than the litigants themselves, even seem to be designed specifically to disrupt the work of the attorney or the agencies working on the litigation. The best example of that that I can think of from my experience, I'm sure others have examples, is many PI requests that the Office of the Attorney General received during the first Trump administration from groups that seemed to be allied with the federal administration seeking documents that had been created for the purposes of litigation that OAG was involved in with the federal government at the time. Beyond addressing that issue, the proposed exemption would also clarify the ability to withhold certain documents, certain sensitive documents that were created because of the litigation and that all parties assumed would remain confidential, such as, for example, settlement communications between the parties in litigation. Although many such records are already protected by existing privileges, not all of them are, and an exemption like this would clarify the protection applies to the records in these categories without having to determine, document by document or line by line, whether any of the existing protections apply. And before I wrap up, I want to address a couple of the concerns that I know that you may hear from opponents of the bill. First, there were legitimate concerns about the scope of the phrase, records pertaining to litigation as the bill was introduced. That's why we're proposing the amendment to change that to compiled or created because of. A lot of the states that have similar exemptions that use, related to or pertaining to, a lot of those states already have judicial glosses on that phrase that narrow it in similar ways. But because of those concerns, we went ahead and proposed an amendment to make explicit what we were talking about. Second, I know from the written testimony, there have been concerns about what reasonably anticipated litigation means and whether, that gives too much leeway in terms of, litigation that hasn't been filed yet. It's not a phrase we've sort of made up. It's a well-known standard in the law that's used in several different places, but in particular for determining when documents created by an attorney are protected by the attorney work product doctrine. So it's an existing standard that could be applied. And finally, it's important to note that this would be a discretionary exemption in the PIA, and like all discretionary exemptions codified in the same place in the PIA, the custodian has to be able to demonstrate that disclosure of the records would be contrary to the public interest in order to invoke the exemption. So there is that sort of structural limitation as well in the bill as drafted. So in sum, OAG urges a favorable report on HB 21 with our proposed amendments to try to clarify and narrow. And of course, we're happy to answer any questions or talk through any issues on this bill as with the last one. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to open it up. Now you know the drill. Open it up for questions. Any questions? Delegate Olston?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess it's PIA Day. So I'm just wondering why this isn't already covered under work product, or have you all ran into problems where you've denied something saying that it's work product and a judge said, no, it's not, or you've had to go to court and pay somebody else's attorney fees because you were wrong?
Sure. I think there are three primary ways that this would be a little bit different and broader than the work product protection. One is that it would broaden it to include work that the client agency is doing to help prepare for the litigation, not just the attorneys working, because the attorney work product doctrine has substantive limits to it. It's focused on work that attorneys do. It can apply to non-attorneys who work for attorneys and things like that. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but it would extend sort of similar protections to the work that a client agency is doing to help support the litigation or be involved in the litigation. The second piece of it is that, as a lawyer, the work product doctrine is it's a complicated legal doctrine that, has all sorts of exceptions and other things. And so it is necessary to, any documents related to the litigation, it's necessary to go through sort of document by document and line by line to figure out, well, is this work product? Is this not work product? That ends up taking a lot of time that when it's about, litigation that's going on can disrupt the process of the litigation. And as you point out, in some instances, we may say something is work product and we think it's work product, but, a court could ultimately disagree with that. So this would sort of, clarify and reduce litigation around the scope of that. And then the third area, as I mentioned briefly in the testimony, is it would clarify protection for some communications between the parties in litigation, which aren't usually work product, because once you share it with an outside party, it's not protected work product anymore. But these are often conversations that are made with the belief and intent of confidentiality between the parties to try to hash out a settlement, for instance. So those are three examples of how this would be slightly different than work product. Work product covers some of this stuff already, but not all of it.
Okay, since she's not looking. And the settlement doctrine would cover the other part. And I'm just thinking that so it seems like you described three different tranches: the work product, stuff that's settlement, and then there's these other documents that the agency's creating in the process of getting ready for litigation. And if they're doing that without their attorney, then maybe the public should see it, because we're trying to have transparent government so that the people know. So I'm just not sure. I guess it's just a policy question that hopefully we'll be able to hash out when we do this work group. But I would be concerned about hiding things from the public. If it's settlement purposes, I'm there with you all day. Work product, I'm there with you. But other things that the public has a right to see, we need to let them see it. So I'm just not clear on why what you're asking for isn't covered under the broad spectrum of our current law.
Sure, and yeah, and happy to follow up on that with you, of course, Delegate Alston. You know, I think sometimes, as an example, you know, agencies might get Public Information Act requests from, you know, either prospective litigants or people they're already in litigation with that are, you know, they're phrased like discovery requests. They're asking for, you know, all documents that are related to, you know, the X, Y, or Z related to the litigation, you know, evidence of like this thing that, you know, the other side's trying to prove in the litigation, as opposed to asking for, you know, the exact documents that they want that are, you know, maybe in the public interest to produce. And so part of the intent of this is to sort of separate a little bit, you know, the PIA from the discovery process. It doesn't do that entirely, to be clear. It's been narrowed to make clear that it doesn't do that entirely, but it's a step sort of in that direction. Thanks.
Surprised the trial lawyers aren't here on this one, but okay, thank you.
Thank you.
It doesn't mean they won't come out. Okay, next we have Delegate Bandari, followed by Chisholm, followed by Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand the intent of the bill is to prevent the Misuse of Public Information Act as a tool for early discovery in litigation, right? However, like when I was reading the bill, there are some vague language like reasonably anticipated litigation, right? So this vague language could allow agency to preemptively deny access to records simply by claiming a dispute might be there based on, okay, it will lead to the lawsuits. That's number one concern. And to the Delegate Alston point, aren't existing legal protection enough? Like already in current laws, already protect privileged information like attorney-client privilege or product document, doctrine, et cetera, right? Expanding this exemption without strong oversight could set a dangerous precedent for withholding government records. And the question is the risk to government transparency. That's we all work together.
Sure. And, you know, to be clear, I know I didn't say this last time and should have, you know, the Office of the Attorney General is, you know, committed to public transparency. That's why we do the PI manual. As I said, a lot of our advice to our client agencies is about making sure they comply with the PIA, both in letter and in spirit. So none of this is intended to undermine the very important work of the PIA. It's about, you know, balancing different interests. And as to the first part of your question about reasonably anticipated, as I mentioned briefly in my testimony, that's a phrase that's used in the law all the time. There's lots of case law about what it means. You know, there has to be some actual, you know, real probability of litigation that may ensue. It's not just a willy-nilly out there. So there are, you know, existing interpretive law in that area that can help set standards for what that would mean. Yes, there are protections, work product, attorney-client privilege, that apply to some of this material, but not all of it. And as I explained to Delegate Alston, there are areas that it doesn't cover, and it also creates a certainty that makes it, you know, much more manageable to respond to these types of requests during litigation for records that were compiled or created because of the litigation that otherwise can sort of disrupt the litigation.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for your patience as we ask
of course.
these questions, and I want to welcome the Attorney General to the Health and Government Operations Committee. Delegate Chisholm, followed by Delegate Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
So there's been many media reports, obviously, that the Attorney General may bring lawsuits against the federal government, against the current administration. It's not the first time, right? So I guess my question is, and in here under discretionary denials, it says, believes that the inspection of a part of the public records by an applicant would be contrary to the public interest. So I understand in regular discovery, nothing's going to change there, correct?
Correct.
So discovery is discovery. But for the public interest part of it, do we feel like we've negated the public interest in the past? And why is this going to be, why do we want this bill now and think it's a better protection for the public interest not to see these things? Or is it just more of an interest for the Attorney General's office to be able to conduct a lawsuit without all of the PIA requests, I guess? And in your scenario, that means the public simply could not ask for certain public records that they typically could. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I mean, it would have to, like all discretionary exemptions, excuse me, the custodian would need to evaluate on a case-by-case basis, of course, whether the documents fit within the scope of the exemption, but then also whether disclosure of those documents would be contrary to the public interest. And this is true for all discretion. It's an extra limitation on all discretionary exemptions, including, the investigatory records exemption, for instance, that the custodian has to be able to explain why disclosure would be contrary to the public interest. So in the investigatory records context, for instance, one of the common explanations would be that it's going to disrupt the ongoing criminal investigation if you release this information. Now, for instance, that's the public interest that explains why it's necessary to withhold in that instance. And so here, under this exemption, if it were to pass, it would be a similar analysis. Will disclosure of this information at this time cause a problem that's contrary to the public interest? Will it disrupt the ability of the state to bring this litigation, for instance, would be one factor.
Have we had that problem before?
Yeah, I mean, I think in OAG's experience, there have been times where requests come in relating to, ongoing litigation or, imminent litigation that's asking for documents that were, created as part of that litigation, where the requests are big enough or for whatever other reason, they're going to disrupt the ability of our office to effectively represent the state in that litigation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Because you have been talking for a while.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Hill.
Thank you, and thank you again for your patience in bringing this bill.
Go ahead.
Sure.
I just want to be clear on how there's assurance that if this bill goes through, and what are the protections against government abuse of this support to determine that we're not going to share things because we think there may be eventual litigation? How do we know that power's not going to be abused?
I mean, the protection against abuse would be the same as any other PI exemption, which would be an ability to seek review from the PI Compliance Board or from a court challenging the decision of the custodian to withhold the document. And then the PI Compliance Board or court could decide that the agency was improperly asserting the exemption, just like any other exemption.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions for you. Again, the same thing that I actually brought up with the last bill. You could see all the questions the members have, right? And we're going to go into the unfavorable next, one unfavorable. I would ask Delegate Kurt to do the same with the same group.
Sure.
And I want you to think about what is it that you really want to fix here, right? And narrow it down and see if it can be worked out.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yes, absolutely happy to have discussions with anyone.
Yeah, so he'll, just make sure you connect tomorrow or something.
Yeah.
And you can do a virtual meeting subcommittee with the members, and anyone else from the committee that is interested can actually join as well. And I want to thank you for being so just patient as we ask the questions, okay?
Well, thank you so much for all of your questions and the attention to these bills. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I'm going to call next, just in the interest of being balanced and unfavorable. I'm going to call again Rebecca Snyder.
Good afternoon again, Chair and members of the committee. Again, Rebecca Snyder with the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Press Association. You'll note our testimony also includes sign-ons from the ACLU, Common Cause Maryland, Public Justice Center, and the Disability Rights Maryland. While we appreciate the AG's amendment to this bill, we do feel like, and I appreciate them asking us to the table on this, we still believe that reasonably anticipated is still broad. It's likely to swamp the compliance board and the courts with disputes because, as Mr. Hughes said, that's how we would resolve that conflict. We also have deep concerns that compiled includes gathering of records that may already exist and would otherwise be disseminated or disclosed, and then shielding that little hoard because it is related to litigation. I also feel like the work product covers, as Delegate Alston said, work product covers a large swath of this, settlement covers a large swath of this, and the impression that I got in testimony was that the rest of it was like, well, we just want to make sure that we absolutely can't disclose anything, so we want to make this as broad as possible. And so I have deep concerns there. I mean, there's government and private parties are not on the same footing. And so I think it's difficult to have government sort of lean into their power on one hand and say, oh, but no, we have to be able to act as a private entity on the other hand. So we are willing to work with Delegate Kerr and his superhero team on this and other stakeholders. But I do want to note for the record that we are asking for an unfavorable report as it stands. Thank you.
Also make yourself available for both little subgroups. I know it will go to subcommittee, but I find that, we can make more progress if we start the conversation early.
Absolutely.
Okay? And thank you for being willing to work it out.
Sure.
I'm going to open it up for questions. I see Delegate Hill.
Thank you, and I'm glad, we're going to be continuing conversation. I just want to have some clarity what kind of examples we're talking about. So even though it might not specifically have applied in this kind of case, if we had a Freddie Gray kind of case, what difference would you think the PIA would be handled with this law and without it? A situation like that, that's something I can relate to. I'm just trying to understand what we're doing here.
Right, and so in the Freddie Gray case is what you were saying. I would think, and not sort of, I think a lot was shielded there already. When reporters were going after police records, so much of that was shielded under investigatory records already. When I'm not as familiar with sort of pending litigation or the litigation that came out of that, because most of our reporting was really focused a lot on just trying to uncover the facts of what happened. And all of that really, it was difficult to get because there's so many exemptions to the PIA. And from a press standpoint, yes, you can, and that was before we had some of the increased powers under the Public Information Act Compliance Board. So it's difficult to say, like, well, what would it have been like now? But in my experience and hearing from my members, there's a lot that gets shielded that you have to really fight for. And it doesn't always come out. And I think it is difficult. So I'll get back to you, Delegate Hill, on like what would have been different in those situations. But it's not a landscape where you can just swoop on in and say, oh, I'd like that, that, and that, and it just happens easily.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much. We're going to go next to a favorable. If I may please have Michael Sanderson. Virtual. Thank you. Good afternoon, sir. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I'm Michael Sanderson with the Maryland Association of Counties. I appreciate the direction the committee seems to be going to take a couple of these issues that are fairly weighty and probably send them to a work group for some more attention. So I'll be really brief and just say, among the things that we in local government hear from our custodians as among the weaknesses in this very well-intentioned law. The Public Information Act is intended to serve the public and make sure things are transparent and available to the public. Among its weaknesses are cases where we see what is effectively moves to gain discovery for ongoing or future litigation that's dressed up as a PIA request. And sometimes that's in the eye of the beholder, and I know we need to thread a needle to make the laws as sharp and wise as we can, but let's vest that work group with the wisdom to try and sift through those things, because there is a genuine issue here this bill is trying to resolve. And if we can make it a bit better, I think both custodians and the public will be better served on balance. So with the amendments from the Attorney General, I think that help as well. So we support those amendments too.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you so much for being with us today. Let's go to Mr. John Galbraith. It's an unfavorable.
Thank you, Madam Chair and
You're welcome.
committee members. Again, I'm John Galbraith. I'm a citizen who believes in the importance of the Public Information Act. I've obviously been listening as the various testimony.
Will you be so kind and push the,
Oh,
yeah.
pardon me. Is that better?
Yeah, Delegate White-Holland, would you like to say thank you? Thank you. She appreciates it when the
Okay,
members do
yes.
that.
Well, as I was saying, I've been listening, of course, to the testimony and noted the amendment that the AG's office has proposed. And so that addresses a couple of my concerns that I had in my written testimony, but not all of them, though. Again, I would just urge everyone to still remember the foundational principles of the Public Information Act, which are that all persons are entitled to have access to information about the affairs of government, and that this right must be construed in favor of allowing inspection of a public record. So I'll be briefer, though, than I expected to be because of the amendment. I think the concerns that have been voiced about the wording "or compiled," as a citizen, I appreciate those concerns. I mean, there's a big difference between something that's created for litigation or compiled. Compiled seems to be, there's a lot of room to say, well, we'll compile a bunch of stuff and therefore deny the public's access to it. More concretely, I guess I'd say that even with the amendment, the proposed amendment, this bill would still hurt the public's ability to learn about important litigation involving the state or state entities. For example, the press would have a legitimate interest in a public corruption case in which the state or its employee is a party. The press would also have a legitimate interest in a case which the state is bringing against a company or other entities. In both those situations, the bill would allow custodians to deny the press access to records about such cases and would hurt the public's ability to learn about them. And that's important. The public's ability to learn through the press about important litigation involving the state or state entities. So as I said, I'll be brief because of the amendment, but I believe that there's still issues.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you so much. And be careful driving home. I was told that it started to snow already.
Oh, well, hopefully it's warm enough that it'll melt.
Absolutely.
For a little bit.
We hope so. Thank you so much. So next, let's go to the favorable witnesses that are left. We have Andrew Bright, and we have a virtual witness, Laura Anderson Wright with the University of Maryland at College Park. Will you please so kind and bring them up? And nice to see you again, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, for the record, Andrew Bright on behalf of the Washington County Sheriff's Office, the Maryland Chiefs of Police, and the Maryland Sheriff's Association. From our perspective, we believe that this issue is a matter of timing. A brief review of Circuit Court Rules of Civil Procedure. If you're suing anybody, since the trial lawyers don't seem to be here, you normally sue somebody, survive a motion to dismiss, and then obtain written and verbal discovery, get to look at the other side's cards, get their records, take their deposition, et cetera. And that's the typical procedure. There are some very rare opportunities when you can obtain discovery before filing suit, but those are very, very limited. Unless you're suing a state official or a local government entity, and then you send a Maryland Tort Claims Act notice, and you probably at the same time send a voluminous PIA request. And so in that manner, you can obtain, look at your opponent's cards before you prepare your lawsuit, before you prepare your client, and before you prepare your witnesses. So from our perspective, again, we very much believe in open government, transparency, et cetera, but when the state waives its sovereign immunity and allows parties to sue a government official, and as you would any other kind of party, you put the state on the same kind of a level playing field. But by requiring premature discovery, you place the state in a worse position than a typical tort defendant would be in. So it's understandable that oftentimes, a PIA exemption like this would be waived. It just makes sense to get to the bottom line, release the records anyway, but it makes no sense to the sheriffs, the chiefs, that the state or a state agency would be treated worse than other litigants are treated in the rules of civil procedure. For those reasons, my clients would support House Bill 821, ask for a favorable report.
Thank you. Good time. Next, please. You can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. Laura Anderson Wright on behalf of the University of Maryland College Park and the University System of Maryland. My colleagues have made a couple important points already that I just want to highlight. What we're talking about is a discretionary exemption, hopefully to be used sparingly in those extraordinary cases when we have litigation that tends to overlap with voluminous public records requests. In my 3 decades, I have seen several public records requests that really are a list of interrogatories completely from the litigation process. And we're not talking about cutting off access to any litigants. Litigants have a medium to access records when they're in litigation. It's actually the discovery process. It is not the Maryland Public Information Act. And it's true that you may have the work product and if you're in settlement discussions, but these PIA requests, which in my industry we call faux discovery for this subset of requests, actually undermine the effective judicial opportunities that the parties have when they're trying to litigate a particular matter. It does level the playing field, and it would not allow the litigant in this case to circumvent the discovery rules, because there are very different processes and even sanctions that come with the discovery process that we don't have in the public records process. And the reality is there are other states that have gone forward with this model. Delaware, Oregon, Vermont, California, and even Texas. There may be others, but I think those can serve as models. I do appreciate the amendment that my dear colleague Patrick Hughes spoke of to the committee earlier, and I understand this will be going to subcommittee. But again, it is also about the parallel nature that discovery and the PIA, when they're intertwined, it actually undermines the processing for both of them. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think you hit the nail right on its head, right? We need to find a solution here that does not circumvent the discovery process, right? So when you meet the smaller groups before subcommittee, I want you to focus on that, right? And narrow it down. Because you could see the questions that the committee has. But we know that there's a problem, but how can we address the problem? All right? Any questions here? Seeing none, thank you so much for being with us. And actually, this will conclude the bill hearing on House Bill 821. And just for timing purposes for the committee, we started at 1. It is 3:32. We got through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bill hearings. Some of them only had 2 witnesses. So if I can ask you for your questions, if you can hold them for the subcommittee, or you can ask a question or so, but try not to ask more than that. And if you can contact the person, offline and get your answers, I can get you out and also get them out because it started to snow, okay? Cool? All right. Let's go to House Bill 455. Delegate Kaiser, Braille Flag Memorial Act of 2025. And those of you that are waiting here, we're going to try to get you out so you don't get caught up in the snow. And thank you for your patience. And if Delegate Kaiser, if you have a panel, will you be so kind and bring them with you? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. I'm here on House Bill 455, and I actually don't think you're really going to have that many questions. I've been here a long time.
Don't jinx yourself.
What's that? Or maybe I should tell two of my colleagues to step out for a moment. I'm not naming names, but I'm sorry, I'm wasting everyone's time. I apologize. It's a serious bill, but it's a pretty simple bill. I've been here a long time, and we hear the easy bill thing often, but honestly here, this is the Braille Flag Memorial Act of 2025, and it's about putting a tactile Braille American flag placed on the grounds of our 5 state veteran cemeteries. You can see my testimony on the number of veterans that we have in the state, what % of the population, and how many of them have disabilities, and for many of them with visual impairments. This tactile Braille American flag, I wouldn't typically put an American flag on my written testimony, but take a look. It's the Braille one, and you can see how it would be at the veteran cemeteries. Look at the fiscal note and see the minimal cost of, I think, just a few $100s in each case, and then absorbed in the cost of the department. This is a cross-file of Senator Simon Ayers' bill. He had a hearing last week. There wasn't any opposition then. Only favorable testimony. It's in there also from the Department of Disabilities. Obviously, I also have someone here testifying. Our Veterans Caucus has come out in support of it. And there's the Maryland Military Coalition that had testimony but provided too late that I'll gladly can share with everyone. And it's just I'll just ending the testimony with my last sentence. It's a small yet powerful step in ensuring that all veterans and service members in Maryland are honored inclusively. Madam Chair, I urge a favorable report, and glad to have someone here testifying on its behalf. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon, Health and Government Operations Committee. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I am William Hendrick. As a blind American and a veteran, I've been a sighted person, or I was a sighted person much longer than I've been a blind person. And you would think something as simple as recognizing the difference between our American flag and a tablecloth is not a big deal, but for a blind person, it is. So in saying that, I'm asking that the committee vote in favor of HB 455, just to allow us to maintain the human experience of distinguishing the difference between a flag and a tablecloth. So saying that, I'll just thank Delegate Kaiser for sponsoring the bill.
Thank you. Great testimony. Thank you. Any questions for the sponsor and her panelist? Thank you. I want to thank you for coming here, okay? We appreciate it. Next, we have a virtual witness, Mr. Harvey Guerry. Will you be so kind and bring him up, please?
American flag. It's not a big deal.
If you could turn that off, that would be great. If you could turn the live stream so that we could hear you, Mr. And I just want to say to the prior witness, Mr. Will Hendrick, I want to thank you for your service. I neglected to say that. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Okay. Sir, would you like to get started? You can unmute yourself. Go ahead. We're ready for you when you are.
Were you referring to me?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you. How are
I'm
you
sorry.
today?
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Harvey Gary. I'm asking for a favorable report for House Bill 459 to make flags available at Maryland Veterans Cemetery. Currently, I served in the United States Air Force from 1980 to 1987, and I served honorably. In 1950, in 1950, oh, in 19, oh, in
No, go ahead.
2015, I lost my vision. I was declared legally blind, and I went to the VA Blind Rehabilitation Center in West Haven, Connecticut, where I was first introduced to Grade 1 Braille. So after completing all the reading and writing assignments on Grade 1, I successfully and currently doing Grade 2 Braille. My family and friends can know and testify how important Braille is to me in my way of life. It opened up a new way of reading and textile touch that I never thought was possible when I lost my vision. So I couldn't think of a better way to honor service personnel, contributions to this country that have became blind and visually impaired, with a Braille service flag at Maryland Veterans Cemetery. Thank you for your time. Once again, please give a favorable report for House Bill 459. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. And most importantly, I want to thank you for your service, okay?
Thank you, madam.
You're welcome. Have a blessed day. Stay warm, okay? Are there any questions before he goes? Seeing none, thank you so much, sir. This actually will conclude the bill hearing on House Bill 455. Thank you, Delegate Kaiser. Next, we have Delegate White Holland, House Bill 331, Public Information Act, Public Access Ombudsman, Delegation of Powers. If you will be so kind, and will you bring your panel, please? If you have one.
Oh, but Rebecca can come too, that's fine.
Anyone
And I
can
have a
come.
virtual witness.
All right. If you can bring them up, please. Thank you.
We will keep this short and sweet, and I believe, again, as Delegate Austin stated, this is a Public Information Day. And so, thank you, Delegate Woods.
Delegate Hutchinson was kind of nice, but Delegate Woods went for it.
Oh, goodness. You all are getting me here.
We have a little fun in this committee. We can't take
That's
ourselves
all
too
right.
seriously, right? So go ahead.
So yes, I have Sarah Klim and Lisa Kirshner as well, who should be joining virtually.
Thank you.
All right. So again, good afternoon, Madam Chair and fellow members of the House Health and Government Operations Committee. I'm Delegate Jennifer White Holland for the record, and I appreciate the opportunity to present House Bill 331, Public Information Act, Public Access Ombudsman, Delegation of Powers for your consideration. HB 331 authorizes the Public Access Ombudsman, who we've heard a lot about today, which is situated in an independent agency, to delegate their duties to another staff member in the office of the Public Access Ombudsman. As you may have read in the written testimony and as you've heard reference here today, there is a severe backlog of cases and delays in addressing this backlog based on current statute.
As such, this bill seeks to remedy this by permitting the ombudsman to delegate their duties, offering flexibility, and seeking to strengthen this office. It does not alter their duties or the scope of the ombudsman, but helps requesters and agencies to have their requests attended to in a timely fashion. And so this yields greater transparency, which we all like. We like open government and transparent government. And more importantly, it will not add a burden on our state budget as there is no fiscal note. And so given the opportunity that this bill presents, I respectfully request a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Rebecca, I have to look twice. You're unfavorable.
But I'm favorable this time, and it's so exciting.
You're favorable.
We all have to speak our truth. For the record, I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, D.C. Press Association, and I am delighted to stand in support of House Bill 331. Lisa Kirshner and the Office of the Ombudsman do a fantastic job mediating disputes between requesters and custodians, but she's only one person. And so what this bill will allow is for her to delegate certain, or any of the powers that she sees fit to others in her staff. And we feel like this will help ameliorate some of the backlog, allow requests to be taken up more quickly, which is always something that the press is really interested in because time is of the essence in all PIA, but certainly for the press requests. So we do support this bill and hope for a favorable report. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go on to the two virtual witnesses, please. Thank you. Lisa Kirshner. Good afternoon, ma'am. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 311. I would also just simply say I really appreciate the very thoughtful comments from committee members and all of the witnesses today on all of the PIA bills. It really speaks to the degree of interest and care and carefulness, and I appreciate that because that's what will make the PIA work better in the long run. My job is to try to help custodians and applicants resolve disputes under the Public
Can you
Information
give us,
Act.
if I may, will you be so kind and give us your name and your position, please?
For the record, I'm Lisa Kirshner, and I am the Public Access Ombudsman.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ms. Snyder was almost correct when she said that I am only one person. As of last week, I am an office of two people. We were very fortunate that the Attorney General appointed an additional attorney mediator to work in our program, which is going to greatly help us work on the backlog of matters that we have to reach people more quickly, to resolve more matters, and will inure to the benefit of the citizens of Maryland. Because of that, this delegation bill is particularly important. To get the full benefit of having an additional staff, I need to be able to delegate functions, tasks, and the authority that the legislature gave me under the PIA to the attorney mediator. I'll just mention in passing, she happens to be extremely experienced, and I'm very confident she's going to help us resolve many matters. By the way, in light of the comments of Delegate Chisholm and others, I want to say that mediation is something that
It's okay. You can take a minute. Go ahead. Go ahead.
When mediation works, it helps build trust in government. It helps because it helps build understanding of each side's point of view. So over time, it's a big help. I think the benefits of delegation are pretty obvious. You know, I would hope this program will be around long term. One person cannot do it forever. There needs to be an ability to delegate. And I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Next, please, will you unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is Sarah Clem. I'm an Assistant Attorney General in the Public Access Unit of the Office of the Attorney General. Our unit is fully focused on the Public Information Act, and we support the Public Access Ombudsman and the PIA Compliance Board. I'm not going to repeat the testimony that's already been provided this afternoon about this bill. I do think that the Ombudsman provides a very important service within the context of the PIA. I think that she helps records that should be disclosed get disclosed, and I think that she also helps folks understand why there may be records that aren't disclosable. And so I think, you know, she resolves a lot of disputes, keeps disputes out of court, and she does need help. The AG has provided some help for her, and this bill would simply just clarify that person, the attorney mediator, can perform the same duties as the public access ombudsman. The PIA does require that the Attorney General take appropriate steps to protect the autonomy and independence of the ombudsman. That's why I, as her counsel, can't do the programmatic duties that she does. The two administrators in our unit cannot do those duties either. So this is it's a very small bill, but it's an important bill, and I would urge the committee's support of House Bill 331. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to open it up for questions now from the committee. Any questions? Vice Chair Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're
Easy
welcome.
question. Now, this is the definition of a simple bill. I just wanted to ask the ombudsman, so your entire office is now 2 people?
Yes, correct. The office of, I used to say the office of the ombudsman is an independent agency of 1. Now I say the office, it is an independent agency of 2. You know, that said, I could not have, this program could not have survived for 9 years without the support of the Attorney General's office. By statute, the Attorney General provides counsel to my office and administrative assistance. Also an office, a desk, a phone, a computer, and all of those necessities. So I certainly could not have operated alone, truly alone. But in terms of doing the work of my office, 2 people right now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. And thank you
Madam
for
Chair.
bringing everyone to the table.
Absolutely.
This actually concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 331. Next, we're going to House Bill 423, Delegate Lopez, Public Safety, Maryland 911 Board, and Maryland Department of Emergency Management Regulatory Authority. And we're doing well, committee. We have, after this, 2 more bills. So you're doing great. And if you could bring your entire panel, that would be great.
Let me move this closer in advance. Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and committee members for allowing me to present HB 423, a bipartisan bill that has no fiscal note and no opposition. For the record, I'm Delegate Leslie Lopez, proudly representing District 39 and proudly serving on this esteemed committee with you. HB 423 is a follow-up piece of legislation to a bill that we passed in 2021, and that upgraded the Maryland Emergency Management Agency to become the cabinet-level MDEM, Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And so what happened is that when we created this cabinet-level agency, we gave them all the oversight authority. We just didn't give them the word enforcement in the bill. And so that's what this bill does. Adds very clear language, just allowing MDEM to have the enforcement authority for what they have oversight over. And so I will leave any details and questions you have to my esteemed panel. I should tell you that this bill was requested by MDEM, and it also is cross-filed with the 2021 original sponsor, Senator Cheryl Kagan, and it is supported by Senator Mike McKay of the Fire and EMS Coalition. And so with that, I urge a favorable report.
Thank you very much. Who would like to go next?
I can go next. Chaz Eby, the Deputy Secretary of Emergency Management for the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. And thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, and of course, Delegate Lopez for your leadership in sponsoring this bill, for which I'm asking for a favorable report. Delegate Lopez covered everything here, but basically this bill simply restores regulatory authority to the 911 board. It's largely an administrative and technical fix, although an important one. When the 911 board and former MEMA joined to become the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, updates in the statute were removed and removed the ability to promulgate regulations. So this would simply fix that and allow the department to do so. So we are asking for a favorable report.
Thank you. Next, please.
Hello, I am Anna Sierra. I'm the Chief Development Officer and Legislative Liaison for the department, and I am here to answer questions. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Let's see if there are any questions for you. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Good job. So this actually concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 423. Next, we're going to go to House Bill 421, Delegate Johnson, Public Safety 911 Trust Fund 988 Suicide Prevention Hotline. Will you please bring your panel? If you're on Delegate Johnson's panel, please have a seat. He will love the company. Good afternoon, Delegate Johnson.
Good afternoon. We keep the easy bills for the last part of the day today.
You know what happens because you're on the committee, we try to let people outside the committee go first, right? Go ahead.
We're all good.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the HGO Committee. For the record, I'm Delegate Steve Johnson, here to present House Bill 421. There's a mental health crisis in America. The advent of the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in 2022 was a tremendous step forward in providing people with the support they need. The integration of 911 and 988 is critical to improve the delivery of services to the public. Carl Henslaw, named in memory of Senator Kagan's friend and Rockville activist who died when 911 failed, was enacted in 2019 to ensure that 911 trust fund dollars are used exclusively for 911 services. This limitation impedes our ability to connect 988 and 911. House Bill 421 would allow a very small, modest amount of the money from 911 trust fund to be spent on 988 integrations. This bill was requested by the Maryland Department of Emergency Management in consultation with the Maryland 911 Board Chair and Maryland Association of Counties Emergency Communications Committee. It would allow first responders to maintain the efficiency and effectiveness of emergency operations while providing support to those in crisis. By allowing 911 trust funds monies to be used on projects that benefit both systems, the bill allows collaboration between the systems and removes any potential duplication of efforts. And we've talked a lot about that in this committee this session, about working in collaboration and being efficient with our citizens' tax dollars. And that's exactly what this bill does. That's why I urge a favorable report on House Bill 421.
Thank you. Next, please.
Again, for the record, I am Anna Sierra. I'm the Chief Development Officer and Legislative Liaison for the Maryland Department of Emergency Management. Thank you to Delegate Johnson for cross-filing this bill and leading in the House on this version. His testimony fully covered everything that I was going to say. You have my written testimony, so I am here to answer questions.
Okay. Are there any questions? All right. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the virtual witnesses.
Thank you.
And there's 2 virtual witnesses. Only one? All right, so let's go to it.
Alrighty, good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Charlotte Fleckenstein, and I am the Policy Fellow with the Maryland Association of Counties this session. So I'm thankful for the opportunity to testify before you all this afternoon in support of House Bill 421. This bill strengthens coordination between 911 emergency services and the 988 crisis response system by allowing for limited 911 trust fund resources to support shared operational needs such as software integration and joint training. By allowing these resources to be used on projects that benefit both systems, as the delegate mentioned, it removes the potential for duplicative efforts without diverting any essential funding away from emergency response. Moreover, because behavioral health emergencies often require a more coordinated approach between public safety personnel and mental health specialists, enhanced integration can reduce strain on 911 specialists to ensure that individuals in crisis receive the most appropriate response and care. The 911 Trust Fund is a dedicated source of funding for counties to both maintain and modernize their next generation 911 systems. So to this extent, the bill really does support technology-driven solutions for both emergency response and crisis intervention. Lastly, this bill enhances Carl Henn's law, which in 2019 expanded the flexibility and resources necessary to implement a statewide next generation 911 system. By better aligning 911 and 988, this bill further supports Carl Henn's law to best serve Marylanders in crisis. Ultimately, House Bill 421 is a happy medium that allows for increased collaboration and coordination between 911 and 988, while still maintaining the integrity of that original public funding. For these reasons, NACO respectfully urges a favorable report on House Bill 421. Thank you.
Thank you for being here with us. Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it. Is Mr. Henry Mazur here? Okay, so for the record, we did call him. He was signed up for virtual witnesses. This actually concludes the bill hearing on House Bill 421. We're going to go next to the last bill of the day, House Bill 367. Delegate Martinez, Health Occupations Board, English proficiency requirements in licensure by endorsement for nursing. If you have a panel, please bring it up. And again, thank you to everyone that has been waiting patiently to be called. We really appreciate it. To the committee for your work.
Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. For the record, I am Delegate Ashanti Martinez, here to present House Bill 367, Health Occupation Boards, English Proficiency Requirements, and Licensure by Endorsement for Nursing. As it currently stands, Maryland is unfortunately undergoing a nurse shortage, and we have practices in place that directly restrict our ability to bring more nurses into the state. Without this bill in place, a licensing board has the discretion to require an individual to display their English proficiency, regardless of prior proof. This means ignoring a number of valid articles proving proficiency, including nursing licenses from other states. This impacts Maryland's ability to recruit healthcare professionals from other states, in turn limiting the pool of potential nurses. Even if they do come to the state, a nurse may be delayed from joining the workforce, as they would then need to take time to take the English proficiency exam and then secure their Maryland license. Not only is this unnecessary, it hinders our ability to hire more nurses, have culturally competent healthcare, and bring people here in Maryland while we're experiencing our nursing drought. Passing this bill would allow for nurses and our healthcare workforce to be bolstered by removing unnecessary barriers that restrict those who want to provide care to Marylanders from coming here. The bill would allow a nurse who holds an interstate compact license, a license that would allow them to practice in multiple states, to not have to take these unnecessary proficiency exams. The bill alleviates this process, allowing for easier pathways for proving proficiency, all without compromising the high standards that we require for the medical community. Instead, it makes it easier for those who already prove themselves qualified to relocate to our state. I want to mention, because on our floor system, you have numerous letters of support from folks like Aventis Healthcare, the Maryland Board of Nursing, Maryland Nursing Association, the Maryland Hospital Association, the American College of Nursing Midwives Maryland Affiliate, Lifespan, Maryland Association of Adult Day Services, Catholic Charities, Children's National Hospital, Maryland Assembly of School-Based Healthcare, and last but certainly not least, the Maryland Community Health System. I join them in urging your support for House Bill 367. And then state your name.
Good afternoon, Chair Penny-Melnick, Vice Chair Colson, and members of the committee. My name is Jane Creaky.
Will you please bring the microphone closer to you?
And so, thank you so much. I'm sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jane Krinke. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Hospital Association. in support of House Bill 367. We want to thank the good delegate for bringing this forward. As this committee knows, we are struggling with our healthcare workforce, both to recruit and retain. Registered nurses, licensed practical nurses, and nursing assistants make up about 40% of the Maryland hospital workforce. And these roles have relatively high vacancy rates. According to the latest data I have from Q3 of last year, RNs are at a 28% vacancy rate, LPNs at 17%, and then nursing assistants at 15%. So removing barriers for internationally educated healthcare providers who already have experience working in other states could increase the number of experienced nurses we have in Maryland. And these nurses are experienced and they bring diversity through language, culture, and their personal experience. In 2023, the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 187, House Bill 454, which removed the Social Security number requirement when applying for a health occupations license. This change allowed internationally educated nurses to obtain their initial U.S. RN license in Maryland instead of another state, thereby cutting both the time and the expense for the nurses. So House Bill 367 builds on this positive change from last year. It'll make Maryland more competitive and remove some of these barriers for these internationally educated nurses. We asked for a favorable report on House Bill 367. We think it'll make a real difference. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and committee members. My name is Dr. Rachel Jordan. I am here on behalf of the Maryland Board of Nursing, where I serve as the Secretary and Advanced Practice Member. So we are in full support of this bill. Not only does this bill hold significant importance to us, but it reduces some of the redundancy that we go through, especially when we are licensing a nurse who has already proved their language proficiency in another state. So this helps to bolster our nursing workforce. We've heard about the nursing shortage, and I can tell you it is very real. But it also helps to streamline the licensure process, reducing delays and redundancy. The Board of Nursing has and will continue to work diligently to ensure that we increase the number of qualified nurses in the state without compromising our high standards of practice. But I wanted to highlight some of the things that the board has already done. So we've supported several initiatives to include changing the number of English language proficiency examinations that we accept. So initially we accepted 2, now we accept 5, and these are proficiency examinations that are approved by the Department of Health, so federally. We've also worked with the Commission on Graduate and Foreign Nurses and the National Council of State Boards of Nursing to revise the English language proficiency passing score so that we are more aligned with industry standards. And additionally, we have continued to work with the Welcome Back Center of Suburban Maryland to assist internationally educated nurses on navigating the pathways for licensure because we understand that this can be challenging for some. It is our mission to address barriers to the licensure process, making it accessible and equitable for all qualified nurses. And for these reasons, we believe House Bill 367 is yet another vital step in improving our nursing workforce, which will ultimately improve access to care for your constituents. So we thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and we look forward to a favorable report.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your work, both of you. I want to thank also the Hospital Association for working with us on many bills that we have pending. I'm going to open it up for questions. I see Vice Chair Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And maybe it's because it's late in the day and I'm thinking about the snow outside, but I'm puzzled about something. I certainly am in support of the bill. But the title of the bill refers to just nursing. But the fiscal note refers to all health occupation boards, and it says that the Board of Physicians wants to hire more staff in order to accomplish this task. Is the bill designed for only the nursing board or all occupational boards? And if so, why do we have the word nursing in the title?
Yes, that's a great question. You know, I had the same question. This is what happens when working with senators first. So the bill itself had the nursing title, but I think through conversations had expanded to the other health occupation boards just to make it a more streamlined system for all of our health occupations that are having similar struggles with recruitment of folks, particularly for culturally competent. We know we live in a very diverse state, and so having folks who have shown proficiency in maybe another state where we have a compact, being able to just easily transition that to our state is what the intent is. But I think the title was originally intended for nursing and then had expanded as they were getting the bill drafted, because this was something that was pre-filed by my cross-file.
And I'm sorry, Madam Chair, but if I can just follow up, have you had any conversations with any of the other boards about the bill?
I have not. I did see the fiscal note and where they sneak in, they need a new part-time person. And so I think, you know, we are definitely open to having conversations about, is that actual need necessary? Because it does put a $43,000 ticket price with this particular bill, but I don't necessarily know for sure if that's actually necessary.
But no one is opposing it.
No one is opposing it, no.
That's what I need. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you. And Delegate Morgan appreciates you asking that question, Vice Chair Collison. Right, Delegate Morgan?
We were a little confused.
Okay.
Thank you.
And for the senators, if you watch this, we love you. Really love you. Don't hold it against us. Okay, we love you very much, okay? Thank you. All right, I don't see any other questions. Let's go on to William Kress. Are you here? And let's move on to Oprah Shaiwish from Adventist Healthcare. I don't see the person here. And Jake Whitaker. I guess, Jane, you testify for Jake Whitaker?
Yes.
All right. And actually, this will conclude, oh, do we have it? No one virtual. This will conclude the bill hearing on House Bill 367. It also concludes our hearings for the day. Please get home safely. We wanted to end early so that you don't get caught up with the snow, okay? Those of you there watching at home, thank you for joining us. And for the committee and staff, thank you for your work. I have not thanked our state trooper, I don't think, this session much or once, but thank you for your work, okay? Thank you. All right, you can take us down. Thank you so much.